Right, welcome everybody. We currently have about 8 students, CPC students in the group. So we will just hop right into things. By all means, feel free to come off camera or come onto the camera if you want it, but no pressure, no need if you aren't comfortable with that today. So just a big warm welcome. This is your recruitment and selection module of your CPC certification. Today, we will be doing a lot of collaborating, and it's my goal that you learn a little bit more around some how-tos that might help strengthen your recruitment and selection efforts in your roles. But first, just wanted to really introduce myself. My name is Jill Cantor, and I've been in the recruitment industry for about 18 and a half years, almost exactly. And I've been with Applin the entire time. And I've also been training with ACSESS for a little over 4 years in a variety of different types of recruitment and selection modules and a variety of other things. I have been specifically in the training and development for about 7 to 8 years with Applin, and I'm really excited that I can take you through this module. It will be interactive, so I really do encourage you to turn off your cell phones, power down emails, and really just use this as an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what you may need to know for your exam and take away a few nuggets as well. Definitely do take lots of notes, certainly ask lots of questions. I will do my best to monitor the chat to make sure that I'm seeing if there's any questions or comments that go in there. But by all means, if you have a question and I haven't quite seen it in the chat, then by all means, come off mute and feel free to interrupt and ask me a question. Like I said, I really want this to be engaging and as interactive as possible. So before hopping into anything, what I'd really love to know is a little bit more about each of you. And I'd love to know how long you've been in the staffing industry. What is your vertical? What is your role? So are you a recruiter? Are you a sourcer? Are you an account manager? Are you a 360? Somewhere in between. And just let us know under a year in the industry, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 10 years, 10 plus years. And again, what specifically area you might be focusing on? Was it temp contract? Is it a hybrid? Is it direct hire perm? And then again, what sort of role you are holding. So I would love to learn about all of you, and I will keep my eye on the chat as you go in there to let us know who you are. Is everyone, I'm not seeing any come through yet, so hopefully you are, oh, there we go. 1 to 3 years in hybrid. Okay, that was Andrea. 10 plus, regional manager, temp and contract. Thank you, Sandy. One to 3 years temp and contract hybrid. 1 to 3 years temp, under 1 year management, finance and ops, taking these modules to learn more about the industry. Okay, excellent. Tara here, been in recruiting almost 2 years and hybrid, a little bit of everything. And Tara, I think you are sitting in Manitoba, as I am myself. I am the branch manager for SJ in Moncton, 10 plus years. Okay, so a real mix of individuals that are in a leadership capacity to fairly new in their career and everything in between, 16 years in management and 5 years in recruitment. Okay, excellent, great. Thank you, everybody. So starting off the module, always love to just remind everybody of the ACSESS Code of Ethics. I will read it out. It is a mouthful, but as a member of the Association of Canadian Search Employment and Staffing Services, we commit to upholding this code of ethics standards and to display it prominently in our place of business. We support the principles set forth below and acknowledge that compliance with these principles is in the best interest of ACSESS members, companies, their candidates, employees, client organizations, and the reputation of the search, employment, and staffing services profession in Canada. So essentially, in a nutshell, really operating as true ambassadors for the industry, operating as true ambassadors for your company and as true ambassadors for yourself and your own reputation. So certainly a great code of ethic to abide by in every capacity. Our mission statement is to promote the interests and growth of the Canadian recruitment and staffing industry. And in order to accomplish these, we identify, communicate, monitor industry standards, positively influence and protect regulatory and business environment, promote credibility and visibility of the industry and the community, and provide our members with strategic support services, programs, and tools. So just like what we're doing today, to helping you with the tools, the programs, the training, and just as you will, if any of you are joining the conference in May, which I will also be presenting at. So let's hop into things and simply put, ask the question. And how do we define this? How do we define recruitment? And how do we define selection? And sometimes people say, well, in our recruiting industry, I don't really use the terminology selection per se, right? We use recruitment. But our clients, and especially our clients that are within the HR realm, and I'm sure the majority of us do communicate, if not always communicate within the HR realm, they use their processes of recruitment and then the selection and a structured approach around that. So it's good for us to have an understanding of really what that difference is and what goes into the recruitment phase to then the selection phase. But before hopping into that, I would love to find out if anybody well, if you guys can type into chat, what do you believe the difference is between recruitment and selection? How do we define this? Just in a short line or two, how do you define recruitment versus selection? And I'll just keep an eye on the chat until I see a couple of responses come in there. Recruiting is seeking candidates and selection is picking your preferred candidate. Okay, that's pretty much well said. So that's exactly it. And it seems simplistic, but we don't often use that terminology, selection. We use, I'm going to recruit or I'm going to source. And so the recruitment phase really is that process of choosing the right person for the right position at the right time. Recruitment also refers to the process of attracting and selecting and appointing potential candidates to meet the organizational resources. Where it comes to the selection part, so essentially the recruitment phase is really one of the most important aspects of running new and established businesses alike. The right employees can really take a client's business to new heights, and the wrong ones obviously can hurt their business by missing sales or turning customers off, creating a toxic work environment, so on and so forth. So there's that piece of that. I saw another chat come in. Nope, I thought I saw a chat come in. I did not. And so from the selection perspective, the purpose of the selection is to find the best candidate for the job. So the recruitment is we're identifying, we're finding based on a variety of points that or the job intake or whatever must have qualities or the nice to have qualities that we're looking for. But then the selection really is the purpose is to find the best one who possesses the KSAOs and personality, so on and so forth. So another question I'm going to ask you to throw into chat. So I'm going to ask you that a lot just to make sure everyone is paying attention and learning as we go along. But does anybody know the definition? What is the KSAO stand for? Does anyone know what that stands for? KSAO. Going to look at the chat here and see if anyone can guess without Googling it. What is a KSAO when it comes to recruitment and selection? Okay, not seeing any. Oh, knowledge, skills, abilities, and other personality, perhaps. Excellent. So this is that process, again, of picking or choosing the right person based on that, who might be the best fit for that organization. In other words, it's the process of the interviewing the candidates, evaluating their qualities, which are required for a specific job, then choosing the suitable one for that specific position based on those KSAOs. And so essentially what we're looking for is exactly that. How does somebody measure from a selection process against those? So the knowledge, the skills, the attributes. And really, again, so that recruitment part is, what's the process? What's that job posting going to look like? How are we going to attract people? What are the avenues we're going to look at to find some people? And then that selection is, of the ones in that pool, who is it that we are actually going to interview, evaluate, qualify, quantify, profile, and all of that good stuff. But there are some key influences. And before we really jump into the recruiting process, there are factors that are influencers by the client that can have an effect on the hiring process. And it's important that we understand this, because you can influence, if you know what some of the factors are. You can drive that fluence, you can drive the process and help steer things in a right direction to the best of your ability, if you really understand what really influences the client. So there's things that are centered around money, right? Money's a factor. What are they willing to pay a candidate? What kind of budget do they have? What kind of recruiting budget do they have? Other things, relationship with recruiters. What does that look like for the client? Do they have a good relationship with recruiters? Have they had experience in the past with recruiters? Have they been positive experiences or negative experiences? Are they giving us an opportunity to prove them wrong, that they can have a good experience? So what is their relationship like with recruiters? What level is the position that they're trying to fill? What's the reality around the ability of them to fill that position? How can we help coach them around that? What are the current market conditions? So we've seen such an influx over the last couple of years, where it was a really, really candidate-driven market. And that's all we heard about was candidate-driven market, that the candidate sat in the driver's seat. Now we're hearing that it still may be like that a little bit, but it's becoming more swinging back to the pendulum back towards the client, more in the driver's seat. So what is that market condition? Are we staying on top of that? Can we speak intellectually to the clients about that? Can we manage our relationship with candidates based on what that's looking like? What about the state of their internal business? What's happening internally? Are they growing? Are they shrinking? Are they laying off? What's happening there? What is their company policy, generally speaking? Do they promote from within? Do they have to post externally before they hire internally? Whatever that may look like. What about just certain legislations, pay equity, minority, all of that, whatever legislation that they're adhering to? And then time constraints, right? What about the time constraints? How about the fulfillment of when they need somebody? Are they realistic? Can we help steer that? Can we explain to them the realities on certain timelines? Do they need somebody yesterday? Do they need somebody not right away? How do we measure our timing and our prioritization around that? So those are just certain things to kind of have in the back of our mind, how important it is that we, as the search consultant or recruiter, can really help steer that and create the opportunity with the client to give them a good process and deliver good service, but making sure that expectations and all of those capacities are truly managed. But we also want to take a look at what are important objectives of recruitment in the hiring process. So if you're a recruiter or you're a search consultant, then you're obviously well aware of the fact that there are multiple objectives of recruitment when it comes to helping our clients through that hiring process. However, not all recruitment objectives are created equal. So just like everything else, some are more important than others. And I guess it would just make sense that the ones that are most important are the ones that lead to the most directly to success, obviously. So how do we prioritize that? And if we're taking a look at what success is based on, and if we take a look at how do we represent ourselves to ensure that we have a successful placement of the best candidate for the position with the client, we really want to make sure that the client is also truly engaged with their services for the search in the first place, that the client understands what our objectives are, they get engaged, we get their buy-in, we do our very best to make sure that that we're delivering what we promise on, but that they're equally engaged in that process so that we are spending our time in the right place to begin with. And so if we're taking a look at the objectives of recruitment, there are going to be really important ones. So the first one that we want to be thinking around is balanced candidate evaluation. So what does that look like? Can we manage that process? Can we set expectations with the client on how do we balance that out? How do we have a balanced observation or a balanced evaluation process on who we're bringing to the table and why we're bringing them to the table? And then the second part is the candidate's willingness to join the organization. So there's two key objectives. Number one, how do we evaluate people and measure them against the job intake or measure them against what the client's wanting and asking of us? But then how are we developing a relationship with the candidate? How are we selling these opportunities to the candidate? How are we getting them excited, whether it's a one-day temp to a full-time permanent role? But we know that without the candidates and without the candidates' willingness to join the organization, then obviously that's sad news for everybody in the process, because no candidate, no placement. So really, this is where that company and that culture piece of the employer really enter that picture. And so the more that we understand the client and understand the role and understand that, what kind of are the intricacies of that organization and the opportunity itself, we can then create a better balanced objective when we're looking for the candidates and measuring them against that and selling the right opportunities. So we're not just selling anything or trying to squish a square peg into a round hole. We're really delivering on that. So we're going to talk about, we are going to talk a little bit about the job order and the job intake, whatever desk you sit on, and the importance of understanding it from either perspective. So one of the things that we also want to think about before we really engage and delve too deep into the process is obviously never assume. And a lot of us that are on this call have been in this industry for a long time. Some of us are newer. So this is probably just a reminder, but that we can never assume. And we can never assume that the client is just 100% relying on us. And we know that. We need to expect that they too are going to find their own candidates. But we need to act fast, and we always need to know who do they have internally. And companies have to move more quickly now, obviously, if they hope to really find the best person and truly be competitive to find the most sought after talent and to find the ones that are not just okay for their role, but the ones that are great for their role, the ones that are going to last in the role. So we're thinking around, what is it that we are competing against? And not only are we competing, and we know this, it goes without saying, we're not just competing against other recruiting firms, we're competing against their internal sources. We're competing against the internal job postings, the internal recruiters. We're competing against LinkedIn and Monster and Indeed and all the job boards. We're competing against ZipRecruiter and all the different processes and options and platforms that are out there. So what we want to be thinking around is really, who is that main competitor? And again, not other firms. So as I've said, it could be also other things internally. And I know as a recruiter, shame on me for a long time, not asking these questions until I was burned after burned after burn, where I'm like, oh my goodness, I never thought of an internal promotion. I never thought of internal transfers. I never thought of those things. And I never asked the question. But over the years, after learning and being burnt right of the way, right? Who do you have internally? Are you going to be potentially promoting from within? What about transfers from other locations? Do you have an employee referral program that maybe you're competing against who their internal employees are and bringing people to the table? What about previous applicants? Have you gone through the previous applicants before in your company to assess those first before coming to us? So lots of things that really we want to be thinking around before that. And really why it's so important to think about it this way is that for the client's perspective, there's so many pros to them by looking at all these ways before even thinking about our own candidates. So we are kidding ourselves if we're like, we're working hard, we've got great people, but we're fooling ourselves to really believe that, of course, they're going to find somebody through us because maybe we're the only firm on it. There's all these other things. It's simple, it's easy, it's quick, it's cost effective. They don't need induction training. It can motivate people internally at that company to work harder. It can develop employee loyalty, all the things that we probably want to see within our own organization. So our clients are thinking the same way. But there are some cons to that. And some of the conversations that I've had with clients over the years is around that. When the question started to come up is, are you looking internally? And so what happens is it can prevent new hiring talent, obviously, like outside potential resources, that goes without saying. It could have limited scope because then maybe there's other vacant positions that may not be able to be filled or backfilled. There could be issues between the employees who are promoted versus those who aren't. And how does that unfold in terms of culture and all of those things? If an internal resource is promoted or transferred, then again, that position too becomes vacant. And then employees who are not promoted just may end up being unhappy and demotivated. So we want to really think about, how do we really add value? And how do we really think about from the beginning of the recruitment process, how do we demonstrate the value of the candidates we're going to bring to them? And it comes right down to every single step of the process. And so, by the way, one of the things that, and these internal recruiters, when I started 18 and a half years ago, there was no such thing as an internal recruiter. There was HR, of course, and then it was a much easier sell. That we're an extension of the HR team. We're there to help them because they're busy and they're pulled in so many directions that goes beyond recruiting. But with all these companies over the years that are developing their own internal recruitment teams, we've had to change our dialogue a little bit. And where we're really still there, we very much still have a place to help the internal recruitment teams. We're not there to replace them, but really to help support them, to work together with them, but not against them. So there's definitely still that place for us with those companies. Now, we have a bit of an idea, obviously, around what recruitment is. And there's different, high-level steps that are in the recruitment process. But let's take a look at what some of those are, and really the main four that we'll talk about today. So number one is the job order intake. First and foremost, that's probably one of the most important parts of the entire process. Everything circles back to the job order. There's sourcing and finding candidates is obviously step number two. There's the interviewing, candidate selection, and then testing and references. And I know that seems overly simplistic because there's so many other steps in the way that happen throughout there. The search process checklist that I've created internally for our company literally has about 20 steps in the process, with all sorts of other kind of directions when things go awry or things don't go according to plan. But overall, as an overarching theme, this is really the crux of what we do, right? First, we got to learn about the job, whatever desk we're sitting on, whether you're a 360 or a 180. Then you got to find the candidates, and then you got to deal with managing that interview process of them and selecting them, and then manage that process with the client and do some testing. So let's start with number one and really take a look at the job order intake. And as I mentioned, in my personal opinion, that this is probably one of the most important parts of the process. And I'd like to get some input on for individuals on, why do you think that this is the most important part of our process, and how does it circle back to everything? So I'd love to hear in chat, or if anyone wants to come off mute, I'd just love to learn on your intake on why you think this is the most important part of our process. And I'll give you some thought there on typing that into chat. It sets the tone and expectations. Without the job order, there is no process. We need to understand the role. Okay. Let's see if there's... Oh, hello.
I'll do this without chatting on the.
Yeah.
So job order intakes I find are very important because, first of all, you start out by building the relationship with your client in order to gather more information about the specific jobs or roles that are open. And by being, I guess, having that relationship with them and being able to take the first order, if you're able to take that correctly and fill the positions, then more orders will come from that.
Absolutely. Beautiful. And I remember learning, so we've got someone in here, how the intake is completed also provides a first or strong impression for the customer. Okay, Kyra, you would literally just took the words right out of my mouth. So, and thank you, Julianne, for that as well. So one of the things that I learned in my career through lots of training that I've done in, various different trainers and such out there is that the job order intake is probably one of the #1 best marketing tools that we have, in the sense that it demonstrates to the client the work we're going to do on their behalf. It demonstrates to them that we're not just, hopefully, and I know that every circumstance is going to be different and there's such a need for speed and we have to move quickly. There's no such thing. Well, that's not true. I was going to say there's no such thing as moving too fast. There are certain steps in our process that if you go through it too quickly, you're going to miss pertinent details and have some steps missed. But the job order intake is so critical because it demonstrates to the client, like, this is the work I'm going to do for you. This is what our organization is going to do for you. This is whether you're a 360 and you're dealing with both sides of it, or whether you're a recruiter. It's important to know, what am I looking for? If you're an account manager, and I know at Applin we have 360s, we have recruiters, we have account managers, the account managers and the recruiters work together as a team. So the onus is upon the account manager to get all the details so that the recruiter could do their job. And the recruiter is often part of that call, so that the recruiter can understand from the client directly, what is it going to take to find the best person? And so I've really pushed back on recruiters. I'm like, well, the client will email me the job description and 5 bullet points and the hourly rate or the salary, and we go off with that. I'm like, that may not get you exactly what you need. In a perfect world, giving that time and really making this an important part of the step, because at this step, right, #1, you know how to find the candidate, right? You know, what am I looking for? You know how to sell the opportunity to the candidate. If you do profiling of candidates before you submit the resume to the client or with the resume, you know how that could look based on the job order and what's important. You know how to prepare a candidate for the interview with the client. So there's so many things that happen at this golden stage that I really believe it's a critical part of the process that really does need to get sold and thoroughly explained to the client on the value of them giving us the time to really understand what they need. And so really, it really does provide a recruiter with so many opportunities to help fill the role. Part of taking the job order does require us to really understand, so that we're not just blindly submitting resumes, that we're not just, hoping that who we submit sticks. Because to just kind of wing it and hope and pray that we've got the right person just based on minimal details. And sometimes, like I said, I know that's all we get. I know sometimes for some organizations, if you're dealing with very large companies, there's a master service agreement. You might be dealing through a VMS system that you really don't even have access to the hiring managers. Those aren't ideal, but those do happen in reality. So sometimes it is what it is, and we try to get creative other ways, but really trying to encourage that client to really help us get the better sense of the skills and the traits, and so that we can match them to the company's culture. We can match them to what matters to them and the needs of that. And so when you take the role from that perspective, then we can hopefully fill the position. So there's so many reasons. And again, as I've mentioned, it really does come down to educating the client why a 5-minute job description or an email with 3 bullet points really isn't always enough. Now, I get it. Sometimes we work with the same client. There's a lot of repeat jobs. I know I've certainly over the years had many clients where I just kept on placing that exact job title in the same location with the same manager, that it was obviously I didn't need to spend 30 minutes every time. I just needed a quick, okay, why is the opening? Anything changed? What's new? And that's it. But in situations where that's not the case, then yeah, we want to make sure that we understand that, because a poorly qualified job is a major contributor to failure for recruitment consultants. Without it, filling the job becomes harder. We might get more fall-offs. It could damage our reputation. And in fact, not only does it damage our personal reputation and the reputation of the company we work for, but as an industry as a whole, because the more times that companies have a negative experience in the recruitment is just going to tarnish our brand as an industry. And so it's just really important. So what are some of the examples of what would happen if we didn't fall off aside? What are some of the issues, or what would happen if we didn't properly qualify our jobs? So I'd just like to get some thoughts in chat. What would happen? Again, regardless if you're somebody who does the job order directly yourself, or if you're somebody who may not be part of the job order process, but either way, it affects us all. What are some of the things that could happen if we don't properly qualify our jobs? So I'd like to see what comes up in chat. Waste time, money, loss of a customer, you won't get the right candidates. Yeah. What else happens in this situation? The client may leave, right? The client might say, you know what, I got somebody that I trust more, or okay, all right. Our company may come across as incompetent, could be a health and safety issue. Yeah, absolutely. Right. If we don't really understand, there's a lot of issues around that too, that we need to understand. Reputational harm. Okay, so many things that can happen, right? Fall offs, as I've said, nobody likes fall offs. Nobody likes to rework what they've already worked on. Okay. So again, so much value to you, to the client, to the candidate. And sometimes we don't even think about that part of it, right? There we think about, well, what does it mean for me? For me, well, I'll fill it faster, won't get a fall off. The client, it can boost confidence. But we often forget the depth of a job order, to whatever depth means. Every company has their own standard or job order forms, or what a in-depth intake may look like. Again, it's going to depend on, is it a temp role? Is it a perm role? Is it complex? Is it technical? It's all going to vary. But it's so important, right, from the candidate perspective, for us to sell the opportunity to the candidate. And in a climate where maybe, again, it's shifting right now, but if we kind of think back to even just 6 months ago, that candidates had options. It was hard to keep a candidate engaged because they had options. Good candidates had options. And so we need to work even harder to sell the opportunity to them. In today's climate, where in some areas there's less opportunities on right now, hopefully just temporarily, we have to sell even that much harder. Maybe we're trying to engage a candidate that is gainfully employed, and we're trying to, talk to them about why our role might be a really great change for them. Maybe that's that passive job seeker. Maybe it is a candidate who's got options. So the more information you have about the job, the much easier it's going to be to sell that opportunity, and also to help them get best prepared for when they meet the client. They'll have a better understanding. It's easier to say yes. So just so many reasons for all of us that job intake is important. Again, for some of us, this might just very, very, very much be a reminder more than anything, but job orders, of course, are the process of reviewing the qualifications, the requirements, those KSAOs from the client. It gives us an opportunity to understand their process, their hiring timelines, what skills and traits will best fit within that organization or within a particular department or even a particular manager. And so there's things that we're wanting to be thinking about, just some basics, like bare bone basics. If all else fails, we just want to get these basics down. Obviously, what is the candidate expected to do? That goes without saying. What is the client looking for? Who do they really want to hire and engage? What kind of candidate profile does that look like? For one company, well, in some instances, I was going to say in the IT sector, it's really skills-based and project-based and experience-based from that perspective. But maybe from what one company needs in a software developer is going to be different from another one. Maybe one size doesn't fit all in certain instances, and whatever role that might be. What do we need to know about the client or the company for their location? What about the working environment? As I think it was Julianne who'd put in there, well, what about health and risk and safety issues? Do we understand what the conditions are like? Can we express that to a candidate, right? Is it a brand new, sleek kind of building and office that's trendy and modernized? Is it completely not modernized? I did work on a search. Actually, at the same time, I had 2 searches. Both of them were for credit unions, different credit unions, but both in Winnipeg, credit unions. One of them was a really high-end, beautiful environment, very kind of upscale, modernized, had everything that you can sort of think of in a really modern kind of environment. At the same time, I was working on the exact same role for a different credit union that was the extreme polar opposite of that one. And one of them, it really was, you were working in the basement, dark and dingy, fluorescent lighting. And it was like, they really hadn't renovated it since probably circa 1970. So two extreme opposites, both lovely hiring managers, but very, very different. So it's really important to understand that. What are the conditions like so you can properly explain it and express it to the candidate regardless. So the best that we can understand that, the better. The salary available. What about the urgency? So how quickly do we need to find someone, right? Whose urgency is it? Whenever we work on roles, obviously, right, if we're going to be successful in this industry, operating with a degree of urgency at all times is critical to be competitive and to be successful in our industry. But whose urgency is it really? Sometimes we forget that. We're just, oh yeah, I've got a job order to work on, and we work and we work and we work, and then realize the client really didn't have the urgency. So where we end up wasting time. So what does that look like? And then the commitment. Again, how committed is the client? How much do they really need this person? How involved are they going to be? So that client that refuses to spend time with you on a job order to really give you what you need to find them the very best person, are they truly committed? So there's certain things that we're thinking about throughout that process. A solid job order is also going to include a variety of other things. Maybe it's around what are their performance standards? What are the expectations? Obviously, maybe there's policies, maybe there's still some COVID protocols in place. What are their hours terms? What about the information about the knowledge, skills, attributes, and other whereabouts do they think that we're going to find the right person? And it's okay to ask that question. I've had a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to ask that question because I should be the one that comes to the table knowing how to locate the right people. But sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Sometimes there's instances where the client can really give us some really great tips, like what industry associations are they a part of? What companies would they like to see these people come from? Are there any companies they don't want to see these people come from? Do they have anybody in mind that we can touch base with on their behalf? What does the organization offer in terms of overall income? Maybe we can stretch the job order, meaning if they tell us that the salary is $55,000, what if we find you somebody at $65,000? Are you interested? Okay, well, what about $70,000? They tell you they must have a university degree. What about a college diploma? So where can you stretch the order in order to open up that pool of candidates for yourself? What is it about the company that the candidate would want to join? Right? What should a candidate, or why should a candidate join the company? What is it about the company that's potentially, depending on the role, why they would maybe quit a current job to come to your company? What's the selling factor to that? Why would somebody turn down another offer and take your offer? What are the issues with the company? Sometimes we don't even think to ask those questions, right? We just want to know the fun and all the great things about the organization, but we don't stop to say, well, what is it about the company that will be a challenge? Because if we don't ask that question and we're not prepared, our candidates, the ones that are out there, the ones that are connected and networked to other people who know about all the organizations or some of the organizations out there, or they go into Glassdoor and they see that there's been issues with the company, I'd rather be prepared in advance of the candidate telling me about it, so I know how to manage that. Setting search expectations, that's such a critical part of the job order process, is to really manage expectations and let the client know how you're going to work, what your process is, timelines of when they can expect candidates. Maybe it's setting expectations like, we're not going to send you 10 resumes, we're going to send you our top 3 resumes, but let me explain to you how many candidates I'm vetting and screening and phone calls and interviewing and profiling and reference checking we're going to do before we even get you those top 3. So these things are so important in the job order process. And then other things. What happens if we are in that situation where maybe the client, like, it is what it is. We don't want to say no to the job order. Maybe they're not overly committed. We don't know about their sense of urgency, but maybe they're still a really good opportunity and we want to take it on, even if we can't get all the information that we need, or we just have a skeleton, or maybe it's that situation where you are dealing with, you know, a VMS, or, you know, there's a master service agreement and or preferred supplier list, and everybody just gets the same email. All the different recruiting firms are on the same intro call or the same email, and you're just sort of stuck with what you're stuck with, and you got to make the best of that. So there's other places that you can look for. So before I share with you what my thinking is around where we can get different sources of information to help learn about the role or to help sell the role, love to find out in chat if there's other avenues outside of just speaking to the client of where we can gather some more information. So what are additional sources of information that we can obtain to learn a little bit more about the company and the role? So let's just see what sort of thoughts you may have around that. So their website, for sure. That would definitely be the first starting point for sure. LinkedIn, yep. Okay, so LinkedIn, who are the people that work at the organization? What is their background? Where did they come from? If you're needing to find an account manager of a telecom company, well, what's the background of the other account managers in that telecom company? Where did they come from? Maybe LinkedIn has their news. What else? So there's website, LinkedIn, social media platforms, Indeed, employee feedback. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, well, I think we've slowed down in some ideas there, so I will show you what are some of the other things. So what is currently hiding in your own company's CRM, in your own system, whether it's Bullhorn or Talent Rover, or whatever other platforms that are out there. So what's in the CRM already about that company? What past searches have we done? What information or intel do we have in that company? A good old Google search, just what's in the news? What's the history? Have there been any awards or acknowledgements? Have there been negative news? What about Glassdoor? What are people saying on Glassdoor about the company? Candidate intel. Maybe you've interviewed a lot of candidates that come from that company or that know about the company. What about LinkedIn, social media, and the job description itself? So there's a lot of things that we could be looking at as well. You know, sometimes it's going to be looking at those LinkedIn, at those current employees, where they've come from, other aspects that they might have in their LinkedIn pages, online reviews, previous current employees. What else do I have in my notes here? Different industry publications, industry associations, other job boards that might have some kind of intel at some point. Who are some of the competitors? So at least we have an understanding of who are competitors to that company. And again, even those little things could help. What else? The website and any of your colleagues. If you work on a team, maybe some of your colleagues have also worked with that company in the past, and there's some things that that might be valuable intel. So in short, though, it is important that we make sure that we have all the important information from the beginning. And one of the things that we're going to be thinking around is when we're coming down to that selection criteria. So number one, having all this information, this is sort of like the short of it, right? So if you're thinking about who am I targeting, what's my strategy to find candidates, how am I going to source them, and then how am I going to select the very best one of all of that? These are just the bare things that we need to be looking at. So what are the titles? So if you're the next step is now we're going to get into sourcing and finding those candidates. So these are just the basic things that we're thinking around. What's the title I want? Are there alternate titles? Is there one's level below? What's the core industry that they're coming from? How about sub industries? Maybe there's a specific company that we know of, and it's okay to ask the client that. What companies may or may they not come from? Maybe there's you know, we're looking at skills, secondary skills, again, stretching that order. So with that, we are going to hop into, actually, before we get into step 2, are there any questions on this job order one? Are there questions you can come on live or throw anything into the chat? nothing's popped up yet there, so I will just carry on. Well, I have a very obvious question to ask everybody, and it might just seem way too obvious of a question, but why do we need to source for new candidates? Why do we need to source for new candidates? So I asked you that question, and as I'm speaking, you can think about it and throw anything into chat, but many consultants have stated that they simply don't have time to truly prioritize sourcing. So they end up working with the best of who they can find the fastest. And that's okay. That is one part of it. And it can definitely work well. But how about when the client is pickier than we're used to, or they're looking for that true purple squirrel? So with that, again, I hear this all the time. And I remember when I was running a full 360 desk, it was crazy trying to find time to source and interview and manage the process and find clients and everything in between. That it can be easy to say, well, I'm not going to source. I'm just going to dig through the system, see who I have. Maybe I'll throw a job up there, see what comes back. But at the end of the day, it can work short term, but not long term. So why is it so important that we need to continually source for new candidates? Having backup, always want fresh pool of talent. Always new people looking for new work, to have a roster of associates to filter through for new roles that come in, also to make the filling process faster, to skill and market candidates for bringing new clients to the business. Okay, so like taking your most placeable candidates to the market. Sourcing yourself ensures you are finding people that meet the criteria, i.e. LinkedIn Recruiter or Indeed. Okay. And so it just needs to be one of those things that we just do every day, depending on your role, that it just happens, even if it's proactive. And somebody who I've done a lot of training with, many training opportunities over the years, is a training guru in the US. His name is Peter Lefkowitz. And one of the things that he's kind of coined the phrase on pre-recruiting. So even before I need a candidate, one of the things that we need to be doing every day to flex our recruiting muscles is to pre-recruit, to find candidates even before we even need them. Now, not just willy-nilly looking for anybody that may not obviously be part of our talent pipeline or the candidate matrix that we want to be creating. But if I'm on LinkedIn and I see somebody, or I get a referral, or I ask somebody for a reference and it's clearly somebody, I don't have a role for them today, but bring them into the pipeline. Have that pre-recruit with them so that we're not only recruiting on a reactive basis, but being proactive. You can get new orders for similar candidates daily, always stay ahead of it. It will make your life easier. But how can you shave off the parts of your day that can be used for higher impact tasks? So remember, the key is to get candidates in the door and out to clients fast. So we do not have time to waste on the busy making stuff. And how often? Right? Do you feel, maybe you end the day, but you might leave feeling that you were so busy, but nothing really of value was done, nothing that actually moves your business forward. And it's very easy for people in recruiting and sales to feel very busy, but were we directing our activities in the right direction? At the start of each day, we really want to ask ourselves, what do I need to do today to move my desk forward? What do I need to do today to get closer to my next placement or closer to my next client candidate interview? And at the end, ask yourself, did I do things that will build my desk and move my business forward? If the answer is no, then we need to figure out, what do I need to stop doing? So in that thinking, it's being as proactive as we possibly can to source and find candidates, whether you need them for today or whether you need them for the future. And building and maintaining a candidate database, it evolves. It becomes that self-sustaining. It's the sum of a recruiter's worth, tongue in cheek with that, but a strong, positive, and trusting relationship with your candidates will obviously, lead to referrals and other things. So the more we're thinking around, how do I source candidates? how do I really select the right candidates? Where do I know to recruit these people? It becomes a sustainable model of recruiting, a sustainable business model. So you're not just kind of, you know, as I mentioned, like working in that reactive state, because we all know that that can become very stressful. And it could also be stressful to figure out, where do I squeeze an hour of my day just to proactively recruit people? So it's thinking strategically about doing that, but I can't stress that enough as one of the things that we want to do. But again, if we want to really be thinking around what I kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the session is, we really need to know what the selection criteria is to accurately source the right candidates. And we do that by determining the selection criteria, by figuring out, well, what is that criteria? What selection criteria do we need to use when looking for candidates? And as I mentioned earlier, it's often something that I know for me personally, over my years until I started training with ACSESS, I always just said recruiting. I never really used an actual term, selection criteria. It was just, I'm going to recruit people. But then it's that extra step to go, okay, I've recruited them, but now let's carefully measure of the 10 candidates. I mean, 10 would be great if we had that many that we could submit. I would never suggest submitting 10 people, but if I had that many and then I had to narrow down to my top 3 to 5, that would be great. But it's, how do we really find the one and measure them against each other so that our clients really are seeing the best of who's out there? And one of the things I'll often say to a client is, or when I'm training our team, when they're talking to clients, is selling to the clients that our job is not just to put anybody in front of you. We're not just going to throw you candidates because we found somebody that, you know, might look like they're a 7 out of 10 good fit for your organization. We're going to bring you the best of who's truly out there, not just the best who have applied to our job posting or the best of who applied to something on LinkedIn, but really who's the best who's out there for you. And part of what we do is, here's how we recruit candidates, right? We're using all of these different ways of identifying candidates and finding candidates and all these different platforms and systems and Boolean and all sorts of fancy things. But then when it comes down to really picking them, we're going to make sure that we use a strong selection criteria, and we develop that with you so that we make sure that we have the right guide to help us make the decisions to bring you those who are truly going to be the right fit. And then during that process, that when we're measuring the applicants, we're really assessing them to the extent that they meet that selection criteria. So the preferred candidate is selected according to their overall suitability, the best fit with the criteria relative to the other candidates. And then you and your clients may use an assessment. Maybe there's a grid sort of matrix to help systematically compare candidates' resumes, the screening process, the interview process, whatnot. And so this kind of concept here on this grid is something that a lot of companies and a lot of HR departments may use, but even hiring managers, maybe that from when they're not within HR, when they're going through their interview process and they're meeting our candidates, they're meeting their internal candidates, they're meeting candidates from other firms, then they might have a gridding system like this. I'm just curious if anybody here, you could just type into chat yes or no, if you use a grid, if you've created to some degree in some of your searches, and it may not make sense for every single search, because sometimes, again, speed is of the essence, and you're literally, if you're on a temp desk, you're getting a call at 8 a.m. and you need a candidate in front of them by noon, or showing up the next day at 8 a.m. But in some instances, have you used a grid like this, or are you familiar of your clients using a grid like this to measure candidates? So just a simple yes or no in chat. I'm just more curious if you have. Just some yeses or nos. Do you or your clients use a matrix to help compare candidates? Okay. So yes, many years ago, more so for perm placement. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that's what I was going to say. So more so for perm placements would be accurate. Not for me, as for my clients, not sure. Okay. So one of the things, and obviously if you're going to create a grid, obviously there are going to be requirements that are stipulated in the job description and in that job intake. Sometimes I don't recommend this as part of a temp process, depending on how quickly you need candidates out the door. But sometimes from a contract perspective, we have a lot of IT contract in our company. It's a huge part of our company. And so for a longer term, like a senior contract role where they don't literally need candidates tomorrow, but there's time and there's a lot of complexities. So creating, and there's so many different skills. Do they have this? Check. Do they have that? Check, check. Do they have this IT skill set and that IT and this language and all of these different things where it's like check, 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 check. There may be a purpose or a value in creating a grid. So we have created grids like this, similar to what some of our clients may have used, and use that internally so that we make sure, are we really bringing the best people forward? We don't want fall offs. We want to have, good reputation with our clients. We want to make sure that they know that we're bringing the right people. So on a large scale roles or more of those perm roles, a grid like this might work. And in fact, I've even gone so far to sometimes sharing it with the client in a conversation. So that's just some food for thought. It's not going to be appropriate in every scenario. Let's think about some sourcing mistakes that recruiters might make. And so there's a trove of so many handy tools and online resources at our disposal. One might think that sourcing candidates for a particular position is easier today than it ever was in prior decades. However, a lot of veteran recruiters might actually think that the current approach to sourcing can still remain daunting. And I'd like to know for fun, because we do have some veteran recruiters in this group here. When I say veteran, like let's say 8+ years of recruiting. Even with all the tools that we have available today, do you still find the concept of sourcing daunting? Yes or no? I personally find that there's no single best method for sourcing, but there are so many avenues for sourcing. So what are your thoughts? Do you find currently it still remains a daunting task? Okay. So what I'll explain on why so many recruiters can still find it quite daunting compared to, let's say, 18 years ago. So when I started in the industry, there was no LinkedIn, there was no Facebook, no Twitter, Boolean searches, not happening. So it was very targeted. Our approach to sourcing was super targeted, and it was almost always headhunting. It was picking up the phone, calling companies. I remember literally on day one, now I'm dating myself, but literally on day one, my boss is like, basically like, here's the yellow pages, like start making calls, or here's the white pages. And it was referral after referral after referral. Who do you know? Who do you know? Being on the phone all day long. But 80% of my day was, and I still tell people that 80% of your day should be having live conversations. It shouldn't be behind a screen, just kind of sourcing all day long and sourcing and never getting that chance to pick up the phone. It really does need to be on the phone, making calls. And in fact, it has become a little bit more daunting to source today because there are so many avenues. There are so many different ways and tangents that we can go on. And LinkedIn, as beautiful as it was when it first came out, I was like, oh my God, this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread, until I realized that every other recruiting firm is calling the same people. Every other internal hire recruiter was reaching out to people, and it's becoming that much more competitive. And so it isn't back when it just relied on who do you know and picking up the phone and getting referral after referral after referral. And so there really is no single best method. It's kind of a blend of them all, but there are some mistakes that happens when it comes to sourcing. So number one, it could be making assumptions about the candidates that you've never met. And sometimes we do this. And again, and I'm going to kind of go back to saying sort of back in my day when we weren't using all of the beauty of all of these online tools and resources and being bombarded by all the newest technologies to find candidates. it was easier because it was all relied on who do you know and who do you know and who do you know and why do you like them and why should I reach out to them? So you learn a little bit about them. But all too often, recruiters will write to potential candidates and use a standard blurb that they've cut and pasted into other emails, something like, I've got the most amazing job for you that I know you're going to love. And what's wrong with that is that when you approach a candidate with this kind of attitude, you're assuming something about someone you don't really know anything about. The truth is that you have no idea what they're going to like or not like. And you do risk losing any possible trust that you may otherwise not have gotten, or that you may have otherwise had gotten. And so that's really something that we really want to be thinking about, is that we make too many assumptions based on what we can see, and we send them a message. Something else that happens, and this is a little bit more older school now, especially because, we've seen a lot more active job seekers, in recent years. But I came from the school of thought. I was trained, and I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I was trained early on in my career that we should discount active job seekers, especially on a permanent basis. So many recruiters today still might believe that only passive candidates are desirable. And we used to sell that back way long ago. We used to sell that to the client. Well, we're only going to bring you the passive job seekers. You don't want the ones that are active on the job market. Well, that's not so much the case anymore. And we ended up discounting them. And so it's still a mistake that we can make, and we shouldn't. Essentially, what's really wrong with that is that it really depends on the role that you're looking for. If you're going to hire, a particular kind of role for, let's say, some kind of, I don't know, entry-level role for a medium-sized business, for example, we might think it's a waste of our time and our effort and our energy to go only after passive candidates. We may think that. We may think, oh, if I'm only going to, if it's a junior level role, am I wasting my time by only going after passive candidates? I'm only going to look at the active candidates, or vice versa. We should be looking at both. We should be spending time on both finding passive candidates and considering the active candidates. And people switch their jobs every 3.5 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if we're looking at that, we shouldn't undervalue or discount those individuals who are being proactive about their job search. But again, in an old school of thought, we discounted an active job seeker and we sold it that way. Now, the selling point is, we're going to find you the best person, regardless of where they come from, regardless if they're currently working or not working. It's about the best fit based on the selection criteria, based on what's important for the company, based on those KSAOs. I noticed that there's a comment in chat. I worry about being annoying to applicants or prospect candidates because there are so many recruiters also looking for candidates. Yes. Yeah. And so, Kyra, if you're comfortable coming online, I just wanted to get some clarification around that comment.
Yeah, sure. Sorry if I misunderstood what you were asking. I took it as where you mentioned that so many recruiters are also using like LinkedIn and other avenues, and there's everyone's sourcing for people, right? Sourcing sometimes the same pool of candidate. And I don't know, just having an Indeed profile myself or a LinkedIn profile myself, I know that recruiters contact me. So, and I know how, like you said, people are writing up one message and then kind of copying and pasting it and sending it to everybody. So I always, I have used LinkedIn Recruiter and Indeed on the back end where you can go and source people. You just always worry about coming off as just another copy and paster recruiter, right? So that's what I was saying. I just always worry about being annoying or having people just not being annoying. I know I'm not being annoying, but being ignored because it's another message, right? So I always worry about that, and you definitely want to stand out. But I think that's kind of the mentality you have with any role or with any task. You even kind of think about it that way when you're reaching out to customers, right? You don't want to just be another staffing firm that's just selling you their product, right? You kind of want to, I guess, going back to my original comment about leading with a good first impression and trying to show why you're different.
Yeah, how beautiful. Love it. Thank you. I agree with everything you just said there. And again, So for me, when LinkedIn first came out, it was like, oh, this is excellent. This is awesome. And then we got Recruiter LinkedIn. It was like, wow, this is like crazy awesome, because now we can email everybody, or email everybody, and we don't need to have the connection to them. But then I started to learn. And as a trainer, and as I saw this going on, I thought, oh, now it's actually making us, yes, on one hand, we might feel that we're being efficient because we could just message a whole bunch of people all at the same time and see what comes back. But by doing that, we are really making the mistake by not connecting with those that just, number one, may not check their email. They may not live on LinkedIn the way that we live on. Number two, they might just think it's spam and just ignore it because they're getting bombarded with other messages. It takes out the ability to have a conversation with them. Now, I know it's hard to get people on the phone, and how do we get them on the phone? A lot of people are working from home these days. Yeah, can't get through to somebody on the 1-800 number. There's so many factors that come into play, but it's really thinking about how can I stand out. One of the other mistakes too that often recruiters make is just writing a general job ad that doesn't weed out weak matches. So one of the things I do is a lot of coaching and training around, job ads, and how do we attract good candidates and the right kind of candidates. And again, that's only one aspect of what we do, right? The majority of what we're doing to find the best people truly does come from referrals. Again, who do you know that may or may not be looking for change, but may welcome a conversation with me? Who do you know who you have a high regard for in the industry? Who do you know that it excels at what they do? All of that good stuff. So the job ads is just one aspect of that. And certainly depending on what kind of desk you're sitting on, from what I hear, people that are in the IT space or in the office personnel space, you might get your best candidates through job ads. If you're in a different desk, maybe it's engineering. I ran a sales desk for many years, never found good candidates through job ads. So it could really just depend on that. But regardless of what that is writing a general job ad that doesn't really weed out weak matches. And we know in some instances, you just might get bombarded. Like really, it's quite overwhelming. Actually, I developed a training session yesterday on how do we just manage the load of resumes that come into us? And it can take a millisecond to apply to a job today. And for this reason, it's often easy for a recruiter to amass, thousands of resumes when placing an online ad. And of course, our clients are getting that same experience. So what's wrong? And unless you set some kind of bar for a candidate to like literally jump over, it's just too time consuming to go through all those resumes. Putting a few things in the ad may help knock out those people who are just sending their resume off without even considering, number one, are they actually qualified? Number two, are they really that interested in change, or are they just having a bad day? So they decided to apply to the first thing that they saw pop up in their LinkedIn. So we really want to think around, how can I customize a job ad and not just do a same old generic one over and over and over again? What are some of the things that you can put in there to, number one, sell it so that for the right individuals, it's attractive to them. Maybe there's the subject of it, like how do you, are you just going to put software developer? Are you going to put software developer for leading edge company? Like, what are the things you're going to do to bulk it up to get good applicants? But then also, what are you putting in there in terms of how to make sure that you're getting the qualified people? And that's a whole separate session on its own, but just really rethinking, am I cutting and pasting all my job postings, or am I making them tailored in such a way that I'm getting, hopefully, the right applicants? And we all know that even if you place an ad, you're still going to get tons of people who don't even read the job ad and just apply, and they're not even the right fit. But just getting a little bit more conscientious around that. Another thing that can happen is turning a blind eye to candidates who don't fit to a T. This is a big mistake. And this is the one that I do a lot of coaching around internally with our team, is that so many recruiters are set on candidates having a specific set of skills and an experience. They turn a blind eye to any profile or any resume that falls outside of the lines of a predetermined list of qualifications. So I've often said to the team, if they are a 7 out of 10, present them. If they're a 7.5 or 8, for sure present them. If they're a 6 out of 10, I'm not so sure there's somebody we want to present. But a 7 out of 10, and that comes back down to, how do we manage the client's expectations at the beginning, at the get-go, when we're taking the job order? In fact, when we're even just selling our services, one of the ways that we're going to operate is we're going to work and do our best to find you that 10 out of 10. But that 10 out of 10 rarely exists. Those unicorn candidates or the purple squirrels rarely exist. They're out there, but not that often. And even if we find them, doesn't mean they're looking for change, or it doesn't mean that they're interested in the role. So client, I'm really happy if we bring you that 7.5 out of 10, because there's going to be certain things that everybody is going to need to work on, grow towards, develop towards. So I'm letting them know before it happens. So I'm giving them, educating them on that piece of it. And of course, if there's 2.5 out of 10 that they're missing, it can't be the biggest ones. Like if all their must-have qualifications and only the nice-to-have qualifications, well, then we've got a problem. But really, I see it over and over and over again. The recruiters are saying, I can't find anybody. I can't find that 10 out of 10. We don't want that. We want the 7.5 and get them in front of the client, because if we're being too rigid on skills and experience, it can really make you miss out on the right people who have terrific attitudes. In various experiences, right? Some candidates can have so many of the skills, they can have a great attitude. And those are some of the most important traits that we can find in a candidate. That you can't, really easily distinguish from a LinkedIn profile or a resume on their characteristics and their traits and everything else that they are working towards or that they have done that's maybe not be on a resume. So although we can't call every single candidate that applies to us, that goes without saying, unless you get very little applicants for a search. But if you get a lot of applicants, you still have to have your rigorous process and maybe that kind of matrix that tells you, how am I identifying these candidates? What is it that making one stand out over the other? What goes in column A? Are they a 2? Are they a 5 out of 5? What does that look like? But you can have great luck with candidates who may not have all the required experience, but they can go out of their way to maybe they've explained it in a cover letter, or maybe they've, if you have a quick phone screen with them, you'll quickly understand. So it is one of the challenges that recruiters do make while they're sourcing candidates, is that they don't see 10 out of 10. They don't even bother. I've placed a lot of candidates who did not have the 10 out of 10. And I thought, you know what, I better just pick up the phone and call this person, or I better try to reach them, because there's something in there that I'm sure I'm not asking or I'm not seeing. And I just don't want to make that assumption. I want to know firsthand. And then also, it can go back to number 5 here, is placing all your faith in a well-written ad. And so on the one hand, I said on point number 3 about having an ad that's not well written enough, right? Not having an ad that's got some specifics. But now I'm saying the opposite in some degrees, that we can't also place all of our faith in that written ad. So that's only one part of it. And time again, we hear that, oh, there's nobody applied to the ad. All right, but that's not your job. That's one part of what your company may do. In fact, I know a lot of companies that don't even do job ads. They source and they headhunt and they do all of that good stuff. So on the one hand, if you are going to put an ad, you want it to be as specific and clear and crisp and attractive as possible. But on the other hand, it's don't place all your faith in that ad. And so often recruiters are going to feel that they're doing something good when they amass 1,000 resumes from placing an attractive ad for the position. But what's wrong with that is that you're going to end up with a huge stack of resumes. And at the end of the day, it's going to be exhausting and time consuming. And that's essentially what your clients are doing. So most recruiters, really, they might take a summary of qualifications that they don't understand and then post that ad. And when they do that, then they end up spending all day going through those resumes. And, basically all that you have time to do is basically give a quick glance over cover letters and objectives. And this is not really a cost-effective way of spending time for you to find the right individuals. So if recruiters take a summary of the qualifications and then of a role that they don't understand, and then they post an ad, that's going to create a lot of problems in of itself. But then if you do create a job ad that goes beyond just the summary of qualifications, you also have that challenge of sitting back and thinking, well, I've created the best piece of work here, and I'm just going to wait for that person. That's not going to happen. We have to be able to do everything under the sun. So yes, post those ads, but don't just sit back and wait for that. And then one of the other one that we often hear a lot of recruiters say is that I just don't have time to source. I don't have time to source, but we have to make the time. It has to be something that's built in. There's just no excuse for that. And so one of the things we hear that quite often, it's, oh, I don't have the time, I can't make the time. It has to happen. Even if it's 30 minutes a day, build it in to find out who's out there, right? Who may or may not be looking. I don't know if they're looking. I'm going to look at LinkedIn. They may not say seeking opportunities. And that's the other thing that started to bother me in some degree when you saw, like, you know, currently looking for or open to opportunities, that even more recruiters only contacted those people. And then I would hear recruiters say, well, I'm not contacting these people because they didn't put on their open to opportunity. And I'm like, well, but maybe they are. Maybe they're not doing that because they don't want their employers to see that, or maybe they just aren't announcing it to the world that they're looking for opportunities. If you make that assumption and you don't know, and you assume, oh, they're not open because they didn't put it out there, well, we don't know that. So we need to build in time every day to find those people and just make it habitual. So I'd like to ask everybody if any of these really resonate with you. If you were to think about these different sourcing mistakes that recruiters make, which ones might resonate with you that you personally sometimes experience? And we've all been there. Like, we've all experienced these things at one point or another. I can definitely say I experienced every single one of those. But whether it was myself or others, do any of these sort of resonate of examples of what you also see as mistakes that recruiters might be making? And you could just type in the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 on which ones you may commonly see. Okay, so making assumptions about the candidates that you've never met. Okay, writing general job ad. What other ones out there resonate with people? Number 3, writing the general job ad to not weed out. No, and it's very easy, right? It doesn't take us any time. We take an old job posting for that software developer and repost it under a different client. It's not as specific. What other ones resonate for people? I would say for me personally, it was number 4. Turning a blind eye to candidates who don't fit at least 7 out of 10. That's the one that I tend to see the most often. And the one that requires a lot more coaching, and people go, oh, that's okay if they're not a 10 out of 10. Okay, awesome. So let's take a look here at the last one then, which is one that's super important, is not having a sourcing strategy in place. And I like to say this one for last because it's one that I think so many people can resonate with this on what's really that strategy. Do I have a strategy? Am I just winging it? Am I, I'm getting that job and I'm running with it, and I'm looking on LinkedIn, I'm doing some Boolean searches, I'm looking at our CRM system, I'm making some phone calls, but not really having a strategy in place, not really creating that rhyme or reason, and kind of being systematic and methodical and kind of doing the same thing and making it scalable and measurable and repeatable so that you're doing the same thing every time, so that you're not doing it in a rushed, chaotic manner. So this is one that I often see a lot of people really struggle with, is just not having a strategy, just kind of winging it, and it can get very complicated and challenging to manage that, because you might or most likely have multiple jobs at the same time that you're sourcing for. So there are some things that I want to just mention. It goes without saying that there are different factors we want to be considering before we even start sourcing those candidates. So the legal requirements, so the bona fide occupational requirements, human rights codes, what, again, as I mentioned earlier, the client urgency, how important is it for them to fill it? Whose urgency is it? Is it your urgency to make a placement, or is it truly their urgency, so that you're on the same page? What's their in-house recruitment expertise like? How does it adhere to the Employment Standards Act? What about the employment equity? How about the complexity of the role, the nature of the role, the availability of the candidate pool? What is that supply and demand? So these are just some of the factors, and we're not really going to spend a lot of time on these. Some of these do get, if you haven't already been in those sessions, some of these get looked at in some of the legal sections, as well as the business ethics session as well. So just more of a reminder of things that we want to be thinking about at every time before we start a search. So we're going to spend a little bit of time. And by the way, we're going to take a break in about 10 or 12 minutes. We'll take a 10-minute stretch break. But some of the things that we want to be thinking about is, well, what are all those sources? And we've talked a lot about what are some of the mistakes we might make and how important it is to be sourcing, whether it's for an active role. So whether you're doing it on a reactive basis or a proactive basis and anything in between. We've talked about why it's so critical to make the right kind of plan in place, but there's lots and lots and lots and lots of options that are out there. And as I mentioned, and again, I really do feel like I'm aging myself, because when I look at all of this, I mean, most of this didn't exist when I started. So it really, really went back to the good old school style recruiting, which is getting referrals. And also some staff directories, some industry trade show type stuff, but none of this were really sourcing options. So it is amazing. It is so beautiful that there are so many avenues, and there's more than just this. But again, sometimes it goes back to what's tried and true and tested, and talking to as many people as you possibly can. But there are different places that we understand where we can look for people. So LinkedIn, obviously LinkedIn Talent Insight, LinkedIn Recruiter, Sales Navigator for those on the sales side of it, Twitter, you can search followers of companies, you can post, you can share, you can connect. In Twitter, again, it's a whole other topic, but in Twitter, if you don't know it already, there are advanced search options. So you can go into Twitter and do all sorts of searches in there and advanced and really try to get people that you can connect with through Twitter, which is actually super cool. You can always Google that and get some insight there. Facebook and Instagram, post, connect, like, share. Again, if you're not familiar with that, there are ways to source candidates. Specifically, the one that I'm most comfortable with is Facebook. There's tons of ways to source candidates from within Facebook, whether you have your own Facebook account or not. Again, I highly encourage you to Google that if you don't know how to do that. Google X-ray search, Boolean searches, staff directories, trade show membership directories. I mean, that to me is also quite old school style of recruiting. Association websites, I used to go to that quite a bit and see who's in there. Do they have member lists? Some associations or staff directories you have to be a member of them, but Zoom Info, for those of you who use Zoom Info, I mean, the list goes on. And then of course you can post job ads too. There's so many places outside of your own websites that you can place job ads to try and attract people. All of these that you can see on there. I've heard some people have success placing a job ad on Kijiji, usually when it's more of a temporary role or maybe like some kind of more administrative oriented position, but I've certainly seen people do that. And kind of all of these other ones. Some of them you have to pay for, some of these are free, but lots of things you can do to get the jobs out there. And so when we're thinking of this, there's other sources that we want to think about. As I mentioned earlier, we have to remember we are competing with our clients' internal processes. So they're finding candidates through promotions and transfers, former employees, those employee referral programs, and then some of the external options. So as much as all of these are options for us to use, we also have to remember that so many of our clients, their internal recruitment teams, for those who have them, are also using a lot of these sources. So we really do have to get creative and act quickly. And that's why that pre-recruiting and finding candidates even before you need them is so important, so that you can act quickly and respond quickly when that client need comes up. So these are just some things I wanted to point out there. But then, as I mentioned, referrals. That is, again, it's considered old school, but sometimes old school should be the new school. Sometimes it's getting outside of our comfort zone, stepping away from the computer and just getting on the phone, and referrals, referrals, and referrals. And the referrals can come from so many places. And this to me is probably one of the first ways that I train our people to find candidates is through referrals. And always seeking, always asking. Don't be afraid to. You sometimes have to earn the right to ask that. But, I've contacted professors at universities and colleges in a specific faculty or within the MBA program, depending on the role. I had done searches for graphic designers, and I remember reaching out a few times to some of the professors or the instructors at one of our technical colleges in Winnipeg, specifically to find graphic designers. And of course, they weren't going to give me the names of their students, nor should they have, but I sent them my contact details. I sent them the job description. And then I received probably something like 50 resumes of recent graduates of that instructor. And I placed some of them. It was so beautiful. And I had their portfolios. So just had to really think outside the box. Representatives, contact your past placements for referrals. Who have you placed? They often know who's who, or maybe they have some intel. Contact all candidates that you've ever spoken with. That's where it's relevant. Reference checks, flip that to a headhunt call at the end of the reference check. Thank you so much for your time. Couldn't help but to notice your title and the job that you're in. Have you ever thought about change yourself? Why or why not? During the candidate interview, there are at least within the candidate interview, 9 different times, or at least where you can obtain referrals. So who did you report to? Who did you work closest to? Who was the project lead on that? Who did you have a mentor in your organization? If you would take a colleague along with you in your next role, who would it be and why? So many ways that you can find referrals just through that candidate interview. It's golden. And some of those, in some of these instances, though, it really is based on trust. And referrals really come from those candidates and the clients and other consultants, but trust is where it's all based around. And you have to earn the right. And because their referrals can become your single most valuable source for new candidates, because you basically come into that relationship with a bit of a pre-approved by somebody that person knows and trust, that it's, the trust starts to become earned a little bit, but you're building that referral base really does take time. And again, if it's based on trust and you need to get that, it's that honesty, it's that consistency, it's that integrity, it's the professionalism. If someone says to you, you should contact, Jane Doe, and you ask them, can I share your name with Jane Doe? And they say, no, I'd rather not. But then you still go ahead and share that name. Trust gets broken. So really think about how do you go about that? Some questions again is to go along with, during that interview or those conversations. It's, as I mentioned, who do you report to? Who do you think is outstanding in your field and why? How do you fit into the culture, or how do you fit into your company family tree? You might ask them again, who is the team lead? Who is the project? And who would you take along with you? Other things is to think about passive candidate sourcing. This kind of goes part and parcel with that. So that's that pre-recruit. That could be calling people you already know, re-engaging them, rebooting them, so to speak, so that you know where they're at, you're staying on top of that activity with them. That's kind of that. If you make this a daily activity, it really will become a sanity saver in the long run. It might take a little bit of time, and whether it's 30 minutes a day you're spending just sourcing and finding names, maybe it's another 30 to 60 minutes a day on just making connects, whether you need them for now or in the future, but just kind of always building that pipeline. But when you're looking at all of the other sources, if you're looking at all of these sources here, you're looking at some of the sources here, then that allows you to create an opportunity for that passive candidate sourcing. So you're not just screening people who've applied to a job, you're contacting the people who may or may not be looking at the time of your call, but your job during that conversation is to uncover that. Are they ready for change? Or are they at least open for change if something that they think that might be better than where they're at today, or might be better than the other opportunities that they're exploring, or maybe their contract is coming up and they want to start thinking about what that next contract is going to look like. So something that I always try to encourage people to do is to think, if I'm going to do passive candidate sourcing on a daily basis, I want to measure that. I want to track that. So how many headhunts am I doing? How many cold candidate calls am I making, or connects? I do understand that we may not be able to reach people cold over the phone, again, because a lot of people working from home may not be able to get through, but connects. And so whether it ends up being through that LinkedIn, My recommendation is not to have a one-size-fits-all LinkedIn message. They should be tailored. And not to the point where you're doing creative writing all day long, but tailored enough and customized enough that it's being spoken to that particular person, not just a, hey, you know, this sounds like I got this along with 100 other people. So try your best to do that. So try to measure how many connects are you making? How many are actually phone calls? How many calls get returned? Do you get referrals based on those? And track that and start figuring out, am I doing enough of this? Am I bringing net new people into the pool of candidates on a regular, consistent basis? I'd like to know by in chat, how many of you feel like, I'd like to know your thoughts around this concept of passive candidate sourcing, and how many of you feel that it should be a daily activity and why? And then we're going to take a break right after this. How many feel that this should be a daily activity and why? Let's give it a few seconds here to see if some responses come through. Or if you want to come offline and speak directly, I'd love to hear people's thoughts around this concept of making candidate sourcing a daily activity and why.
Would being open to the public count as
Sorry?
being open to the public? I mean, we're open to the public, so we constantly have people walking in and registering with a firm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would that count as like a daily?
I think that to me would be the equivalent of someone actively applying to a job, like a job posting per se.
Okay.
I think,
But by them coming in to register, we also provide them the information of the types of jobs that we currently have available. And then a lot of the times they'll come back with a friend. So,
yeah. I think that, again, as long as we're every day trying to get new people into the pool, like if they're walk-ins like that, and if that's kind of a part of the structure of your organization, then yeah, right, it's attracting people, just getting new people, right, at the end of the day, however you get them. Keeping your pool of people active, building rapport along the way. Yes, you can uncover candidates that may not be known by other recruiters. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, right? If we're getting out there and we're proactively reaching people that they may not be aware of already, then we open up the door of having our own exclusive candidates. Exclusive may not be the right word, but having more of an opportunity to present people that may not otherwise be presented. Yeah, some people, until you speak with them, may not realize they are unhappy in current roles until you explain some exciting points you have in a new opportunity, puts the idea in their head, there may be better options. Beautiful. And that's some of the things that's actually probably much of my existence when I was recruiting, like really more on that headhunting basis. It was, I spoke to so many people that didn't even realize that they would be looking until I started uncovering, you know, a candidate wound or a pain point or why they may look for change. Is there any reason why you would change, and what would that look for? Can you get that in your current situation? Have you discussed those issues with your current manager? Do they know that you're don't want to work remote? Do they know that you only want to work remote? Do they know that the commute is too long? Do they know that you're unhappy with the salary? Do they know that that the culture is bad? Do they know that, you know, that you want an extra week vacation? Are they prepared to give that to you? Have you asked them that question? So there's so many things that we can uncover in a direct conversation by contacting these candidates live or directly that we miss out by just sending them messages on LinkedIn by saying, hey, are you interested in a role? They might respond back, no. And then end of conversation. So the more that we can try to dangle the carrot enough to get them on the call, and that's going to take a whole, again, that could be a whole other session on how do we do that in LinkedIn, and how do we ask them, how do we even get them on the phone? Because you can't ask them all those questions in messaging. Okay, Awesome. All right, guys, we are going to break. So right now it is let's call it 1:35 Winnipeg time. So let's come back at 1:45. So we'll take 10 minutes and then we will pick up from where we left off. We'll talk a little bit about screening and interviewing. That's kind of now getting more into that selection part of it. So we've talked about recruiting and all the values and the reasons and how it goes back to that job order and all that good stuff. Now we'll talk about screening and interviewing, and then we'll spend just a little bit of time on reference checks. So I will see you back here in 10 minutes. To fill up some coffee or tea or some beverage. And just by a thumbs up in chat, just certainly let me know in chat if you are back. Just want to make sure I've got enough people that have returned back to the session before we get started. So if you don't mind just letting me know in chat that you are here, then we will get started. Okay, I see a couple. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Okay. We will just hop right back into it. There might be a few still coming in, but we'll just get started where we left off. Okay, perfect. So we are now, as I mentioned, we are heading into the selection start of it. We've clearly defined what recruitment is, and that being one of the most important parts of our high-level steps. So when we get into the screening and the interviewing process, obviously, as it says, and it goes without saying, this is really where we start finding out which ones of the many that we've sourced are going to fit the bill. Good recruiters qualify the candidates they meet in advance of presenting them to the clients by making sure that the candidates have the skills, they have the capabilities required and the right motivations, that they can speak the right, they can speak to the right candidate about the right positions. Just going to see if there's a question here in chat. Oh, it's just Jennifer saying that she's back. Great. So imagine you were looking to buy, a nice secondhand car, for example. Would you just look on the internet and then plan to test drive it, or would you ask questions? Most of us would certainly want to ask questions. You'd want to know about the age of the car, about the mileage of the car, the condition of the car, maybe how many owners have the car. Is there an accident history? And so anyone who doesn't necessarily pre-screen when buying a car runs the risk of wasting their time and their money. And goes without saying, the same falls for us. So unless we enjoy working day and night to hit our targets, we'll need to work efficiently. And how? It is to ask questions, it's to pre-screen, it's to qualify, it's to make sure that we are bringing the right people forward and we're asking the important questions. And one way to pre-screen those candidates that are actively seeking a new job prior to committing to them is by having a proper interview. And is by doing that is to properly pre-screen them, find out, are they somebody that fits the bill? Do they hit some of the key objectives that we're looking for? Does your part of your process allow for a second step, which is a more in-depth interview? Or if your process is more of a one-time, it's a screening / interview all in one, then are you creating enough room in that and enough time spent with that individual to really thoroughly understand, do I have the right fit or not? Do I run the risk of ruining, my reputation or kind of maybe not having the deal happen if I go through that process much too quickly without really understanding who am I putting in front of the client? And so there's certain things that we want to be thinking about every time that we're screening / and or interviewing a candidate. Is this candidate a star? Am I going to waste my time working with this candidate? Am I going to waste my client's time by bringing this candidate forward to them? What opportunities do I have for this candidate right now or potentially in the near future or maybe in the far future? So there's lots of things that we want to be thinking about to really help us determine which direction do we want to go with these candidates. But if we keep those three objectives in mind, are they a star? Will I waste my time and my client's time working with this candidate? And do I have something for them or in the future? And something that we also want to really remember is that it's really hard for us to get a second chance to make a good first impression. We get usually one shot at making a first impression. And so when we're dealing with candidates, we want to give them a good positive impression. We want to make sure that when we're dealing with candidates and we're screening them, and it's kind of their first introduction to who we are, to who our organization is, we want to create that lasting relationship with them. We want to be excited. We want to be upbeat. We want to be confident. We want to make sure that that candidate and all of our candidates know that we're there to help them in a positive way, that we're supportive, that we're conversational, that we're really listening to what matters to that individual. And by taking 2 minutes to screen a candidate, it's going to be hard to convey that. It's going to be hard to get that out. I know in speaking with some individuals that they might do a screening call in 2 minutes or less and then make that decision. And I understand that there's a need for speed and there's time, and time kills deals in our business, but we really want to make sure that at bare minimum, we're spending 7 to 10, 15, even better minutes to really understand if we've got somebody that hits the right skill set and the right experience level before we could really determine whether a yes or a no. And similar to the sourcing mistakes that we might make when it comes to screening, we might screen somebody out way too fast if we just take a very short, couple of minutes to screen them. So we really we might screen somebody in too quickly, or we might screen somebody out too quickly. So my recommendation is always to make that screening call really important. That screening call, again, whether that it leads to a second interview or whether that screening call kind of blends into an interview. And again, everyone has different processes, but to really give yourself and give that candidate that fair opportunity to understand, are they going to be right for us? So I'd love to know, just more out of interest, on how many people, and again, because there's so many different processes and way that companies do things, but what I'd love to understand is, do you typically just have a phone screen? And maybe it might lead into a little bit of a longer call, become the interview, or is your process a two-step process where first you do that quick 10-15 minute screen, you both decide whether it makes sense to continue on, and then somewhere later that week you might schedule the next step, which might be like a 30-minute interview, 20-30 minutes. So I'm curious to know if yours is more of a one step, and there's no right or wrong. It's just, I'm just curious, everyone's different. So is your process more of that one step, or is yours more of a two-step process when you're developing that candidate relationship? Just like to know in chat. Okay, so there's a couple two-step phone screen first, and registrations, and in-person interview. Third step is with the client. Okay. Any others? I write policy, I don't recruit, but we recommend two-step. Okay. Perfect. Any others? Any one-step ones that are out there? Okay. All right. So it seems like the majority that have responded there are the two-step process. Excellent. So then why do we do that? And why are we spending that time doing that screen before we go to the next step? And there's so many options that are in front of you for screening and assessment. There's lots of reasons why. I highly recommend the two-part process. Again, there's no right or wrong, but it's just personal preference and personal company policy. But I do recommend that. Is number one, it can help reduce that candidate pool to a manageable level so that you can start with like very quickly, like, 10 minutes, are they fit? Why or why not? Maybe not a fit for this, but a fit for down the road. Again, are they that star? And as I mentioned, will they waste my time? Do I have opportunities? Do they meet the criteria on a current role? Maybe it's a role that they applied to. Maybe it's a role that you reached out to them directly about. But there is a variety of different ways we can do these quick assessments. And really understand, are we even working with the right candidates? Again, whether it's now or in the future. So there's resumes, application forms. I know in the past, we used to do a lot of application forms with our new candidates, not as much now, but some companies still do that. Pre-interview questionnaires. So one of the steps in my process, I often would send a candidate a pre-interview questionnaire. Not really formalized, but just a list of, 6 questions or so. That telephone screen, that interview, is there stuff, web-based information, right? Are we looking on LinkedIn, understanding their background a little bit based on that? One of the things I always want to make sure I'm doing is that I'm cross-referencing their LinkedIn profile to their resume, make sure that there isn't anything that's glaring, anything that's really kind of contradicting one another? Are there any gaps? There's so many fake resumes out there today that we really want to make sure that are we looking at a real resume? Does it come across as a fake resume? That too is another session on its own. It's a big topic, but how do we really make sure that we're getting legitimate candidates? Again, some companies might use that matrix or rubric, and some will use electronic scoring. So some of our organizations, our firms may use that, you know, using keywords, what's in the applicant tracking system. And certainly a lot of our clients might use some format of electronic scoring. So there's lots of ways to look at the different assessments that are out there. And again, these are just some of the ones that are commonly used by our clients as well. But how about really thinking about the resume, receiving the resumes and managing that part of the process? Something that we really want to be remembering is that the minute that we're doing work for a client, we become liable. We are basically an extension of them when we are a third party partner for them on helping them find candidates. So we do become liable. And when we make that decision to work with them, we should also be setting expectations with them, everything from those turnaround timeframes, both for resume review, interview feedback, to whether or not that you'll have access to their internal systems, or at least a listing of the candidates that maybe they already rejected, so we don't duplicate efforts. But there's elements to us that we become part of that third party for them, that partnership with them, that we really want to make sure that we set those expectations so that everyone's on the same page, and also because we really truly do become liable. And when we're looking at reviewing of the resumes that we're receiving, we want to keep the following points in mind to ensure that we're really doing a better job of the screening process, right? Why have they changed? How about the longevity of each organization? Is it short-term because they were contract or temp positions? Are there long gaps in their employment, and why? Have they been job hopping? Do they have a lack of career progression? And doesn't mean that's a bad thing. It just might mean that person has chosen that they're happy where they're at and didn't want to progress. Are there missing dates? How about no education if required? Absolutely. It goes without saying, no discrimination whatsoever under any circumstance. So we want to be thinking around, you know, where do we want to make sure that we're doing a proper job so that we're eliminating the chance of surprises. Nobody likes surprises. Recruiters particularly don't like surprises. Typically, the only way that a recruiter ever likes a surprise is when a client comes back and says, you know, I've interviewed both your candidates. We really can't decide between both. We love them both. We're going to hire both of them. Those are probably the bulk of the surprises that we do like. But the other kind of surprises as recruiters typically don't make us very happy. But we have to spend the time at this stage looking at all of these factors so that the surprises don't happen. Because if we don't ask the questions, if we're not thorough in each of these things, our clients will ultimately come back to us and say, you know, did you know that, you know, the reason why they had this long gap in employment is because they were let go? Or did you know? And again, it's our job to ask all those details. We shouldn't have a client ever come back to us informing us of what we should have already known about the candidate after their interview stage. It's our job to be thorough and mitigate any of those issues from coming up before they even happen. Other things that we really want to be thinking around is identifying those red flags. And resumes are by design very personal documents where candidates truly do have that free rein to describe themselves, to describe their skills and experience in any way that they want. And it can lead to the ambiguity. There can be potential issues that need to be qualified further. And so when we're thinking around our job, that liability as we become that extension of them comes back to really making sure that we've qualified, we've quantified, we've asked the questions, we've done the digging, and we'll talk about in our next, you know, in step 4, we've done the testing, we've done the background checks, that we do everything to make sure that we're bringing true, viable candidates to the client where there's no surprises. And again, we can only do what we can do. Surprises are always going to happen. Unfortunately, it's a reality, but the more we can try to mitigate the risk, the better off that we're going to be for everybody. And so what I'd love to ask you is, what could be examples of a red flag in someone's resume? If we're thinking about red flags in someone's resume, what could be an example of that? Recognizing that there's not only are there red flags, but there's also a lot of fake resumes that are out there, right? Candidates who have basically created 5 or 10 different versions of their resume, but have recreated them to look different and keep reapplying to the same job under different names and all sorts of crazy things that we're hearing about. So what are some of the red flags that we want to really pay careful attention to and be aware of in a resume? Too many jobs. Okay, and if there's too many jobs, maybe we want to qualify that, right? Were they contract, were they temp? Maybe a lot of short-term temp assignments, jumping from job to job. Why? Again, short-term contract, or were they just not able to hold a job? Why? What are some other red flags? Big gaps in time worked is a big one for me, finding out why, right? So what are those reasons for those gaps? What were they doing at that time? For me, it's acronyms. Recruiting a forklift for a higher security company. Resume was good with experience at KPC. Turns out it was Kingston Penn. Okay. All right. So that's good to know those things, right? Whether that would have disqualified the person or not, but it's better to know than have a client tell us, hey, did you know this? Did you know that? We are the ones that need to know that before the clients do. So many issues that could arise when we don't do those things. Okay. That was a good example. Now, we took our break a little bit sooner, so we'll just skip through that. We're not doing a break again right now. But how about finding the most qualified? And how do we even determine, quote unquote, the perfect candidate? And truly, at the end of the day, sometimes the best candidate is not necessarily the best in the client's eyes. So from time to time, we deal with customers who lack the experience in hiring. Some hire the person they like or the person that are most like them. So oftentimes, unfortunately, our clients aren't necessarily looking at the person who truly is the best for them. They are looking at, well, who do they like the most, which is true. They want to like the individual, but our job is to understand what we are looking for so that there's that personality fit, there's the fit to the culture, there's a fit to the company, there's a fit to the job. So again, I'm going to say it again. Sometimes the best candidate is not the best in the client's eyes. From time to time, we deal with customers who lack the experience in hiring. Some hire the person they like or the person most like them. And I've seen that happen time and time again when I was a sales recruiter, that the client would be like, oh, and then I really like that person. You know, we both, I don't know, we both graduated from the same, program at university. We both worked at Xerox, or, I'm going to hire that person because they're the most like me. And that doesn't always mean that they're finding the most qualified person. So there's factors that come into play here. What we need to be really thinking about and educating the clients and then finding the right candidates based on that is that they may like a person, which is great. That's a massive part of it. You have to kind of like who you hire and who you work with. But are they really finding the best person based on the skills, based on the character traits, based on the fit for the job, and not just going 100% based on personality? There needs to be a blend of other factors. So number one, the skills. Can they actually do the job? Technically speaking, can they do the job? What about capabilities, right? How well can they do the job? So it's one thing to have the skills, right? Can they do the job? Then the next is the capabilities. Well, how well can they actually do it? And then the last one is the motivation, right? Why do they even want a new role? Or why do they want this role? What's motivating them? What's that driving factor every day? Do they have a wound? Do they have a reason why they're making that change? And so when we start understanding some of these things, then we can start thinking around, well, skills, right? We're looking at on the resume, from the interviews, the experiences, the reference checks that we do. Do they actually have that? The capabilities. So this might come from also from references, but testing. Maybe there's certain types of testing that they have to do throughout the interview hiring process. Maybe there's behavioral style interviews. Maybe in some instances they have to do a, shows like a work sample. For example, when I was recruiting for that graphic designer I mentioned, I had to see a portfolio. So that shows their capabilities of the work that they can do. And then the motivation that comes from, that overall, what's driving them, what's happening, have they been tried to address it in their current situation? What is it that's going to really help that individual make the move? And so based on these, my question to all of you is, of these three key areas, skills, capabilities, and motivation, which one would you say is the most important key factor and why? What would be the most important factor and why? Capabilities, skills can be taught and motivation inspired. Okay. Let's see what else people feel. So of these three, skills, capability, or motivation, what do you feel is the most important when you identify if you've got a viable candidate to present to a client? Motivation? Motivation, skills can be taught and capabilities got them the interview. All but motivation is most important. Okay. Skills, some skills can't be taught if it's high-end education skills. So without that, they can't perform their duties. Okay. All right. So all of them are important, but at the end of the day, the motivation is the most important factor. Why? To what Jen is saying, that some skills can't be taught, but if they don't have the skills, then they're just not going to make it in front of the client for the interview, right? So typically it's the skills is they either have it or they don't. And that should be some of that key criteria when you're looking at that 7 out of 10 or that 8 out of 10. Do they have the skills? Do they have the must-have skills required to do the job? Do they have some of the nice-to-have skills? Do they have the capabilities? So number one, you got 10 candidates that all have the same skills, relatively speaking. Now I need to find the top 3 to send to the client. So which ones have the greatest capabilities of them? So they could have all the skills in the world. They could be the best at what they do. But if they aren't motivated, if they're not ready for change, if they're not motivated for that next career step, if they're not motivated to leave their job, if they're not motivated to, find a new contract, or they're not motivated enough for what you're presenting to them because they've got other options in front of them, then you don't really have a candidate.
I have a question.
What's that?
Motivation.
Mm-hmm.
How would you determine whether they have that motivation for those jobs? Because the reason why I'm asking this is because we will have candidates that come in and to us, they show the motivation. Maybe they go through an interview, they show that motivation, but when they actually start doing the job, it's like the motivation is gone.
Yes. Excellent question. So with that, so the motivation, the word itself, and it's funny because I kind of played around with the word, because the word that what I've always been trained on is career wound. But I moved it to motivation at some point because sometimes individuals, let's say if they're not working or they're on contract and their contract's coming up and their motivation or their wound is they need their next contract. So I changed it to motivation, but the way that really to think about it is what's motivating them to make that change. And so what happens when they actually get into that job and they're just not motivated, they're kind of playing the game, and they're all excited and your client likes them, and then they come in and within a few weeks, it's very obvious that they're just not there. It's harder for you to manage that piece. But one of the things that I really encourage, and I do a ton of training around this internally with our team, is that uncovering the candidate wound or wound / motivation to make change or to find a new contract. So what's driving them? And questions around, let's just say they are currently working and you ask them why they're looking for change. If they say to me that they're only looking for change because they want more money, to me, that's not really a strong enough motivation or wound, because we all know they can get bought out. They can, get a counteroffer. So if they say they want more money, there has to be something else attached to that. So it might be, yes, I'd love to have more money, but really what's driving it is bad workplace culture, or what's really driving it is that I no longer want to be working from the office. I only want to work from home. That's not an option here. Great candidate. Have you actually asked your company? What if the company came back and said to you, you can work 3 days from home, but 2 days in the office? Would that inspire you to stay? So in other words, the motivation is what's going to keep you in your current situation. If your company was able to give you, or the current other jobs you're looking at or contracts that they're looking at are going to address some of those things that you're finding to be a pain point. Maybe some of them say the geography is too far. Well, does your company know that you feel that way? What if your company comes back to you and says you can work from home, or you can work 4 days from home, but just 1 day in the office? Well, that eliminate that geography. So now you're not late every day to pick up, little Johnny from daycare. So there's things like that is where I'm really like doing a real deep dive on understanding that reason why they would be willing to make that change, and can that be fixed in their current situation today? If it can be fixed in their current situation today, I'm not sure if I'm that comfortable bringing them forward, in all honesty, because I feel like it could potentially waste everyone's time. Doesn't mean that is always the case, but at least I have a little bit more direction where I know where I'm going to start having more frequent conversations with them about counter offers and the what ifs and the hypothetical scenarios. Again, it's not foolproof, but that's sort of where I start delving into that. So I'm not really sure if that answered your question, but that's kind of what I mean here by motivation, though. Yeah, pain point, right? So Tara says the pain point. Yeah. So other things, assessing candidates. So there's some key things that we're really trying to look at again, if we go back to that. So the skills, right? A little bit more explained. And we want to hear that, there really are a blend of approaches that include from the skills perspective. We're looking at their resumes, we're looking at their LinkedIn profiles, maybe they've sent us a cover letter and we're reading that. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to how do they measure against the list of, skills that they should have in the experience or in the roles that they're in, and how does that measure against what our clients need, whether it's a current client or a future client, and you just kind of know what type of roles you're always looking for. The capabilities, of course, really looking deep on, well, how do they measure against the others? So if you've got those 10 candidates, they all have the same skills, but now you're taking the time to say, okay, great, walk me through what some of your success factors have been. What have been your key accomplishments? What's the legacy that you would leave behind when you leave that company, or when you've completed that contract? What legacy, right? What did you do? What did you accomplish that was unique to you? What have you done to make your company money? What have you done to save your company money? What have you done to improve processes, decrease inefficiencies, increase efficiencies? So basically, what have you accomplished and how good are you at those things, essentially? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your capability in XYZ? How would you rank that against others in your field? What are some of the areas that you feel that you don't have a strong capability in, and why? So it's really delving into that. And then that motivation piece, right? As I've already given you that example. So how do we really assess for that? And sometimes it's also really just asking, right, what that individual really is truly looking for, but at the end of the day matters. When they get out of bed every day, right? Maybe that's too personal to ask, but at the end of the day, when you wake up and you get ready for work, what inspires you? What gets you excited? What's going to drive you? What's going to deplete you? What are the current factors that are depleting you? And then dig, right? Keep digging and digging and digging. And I'm famous in my training and my candidate and client communications. I'm constantly asking like the 2 key words: what else? And what else? And what else? So if they say geography, great, let's explore that. Does your client know you feel that? Does your boss know you feel that way? Is there anything they can do to change? Would that make you stay? Great. And what else? Well, maybe I wanted to have less travel. Does your company know you're traveling too much? What does that look like? What would happen if they decreased your travel? Would you stay? Great. And what else? So I often joke with a candidate that I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's my job to make sure that I'm getting them what they want and what's going to be important for them. And as I mentioned, that career wound, right? That motivation is so important. And really, if we're talking about what are some of the valid career wounds to some that maybe not be as valid, if I ever, and again, because I was recruiting in a sales area, so most of my candidates are very money motivated. They were very, competitive. And quite often I would call a sales candidate. It's like, so if you were to make change, what would be the reasons why? More money. It was constantly more money, more money, more money. I'm a salesperson. I want more money. I'm driven by money. But that wasn't enough. And sometimes I would have candidates who were literally the purple squirrels, who I could not probably find many of them. And if they were only money driven, the majority of the time, either I would say, I would love to be able to work with you, but what really matters to our client is that you really have a motivation that goes beyond just more money. Because if the next opportunity comes along that offers you more money, how do we know that you're not going to just, jump ship and move to that or accept a counter offer? So there's certainly wounds that are more valid than wounds that aren't valid. If it's just money and money alone, sometimes that's a reality. But if it's just that, given the situation, we want to be really thinking about what's valid. And for me, to be happy, to really feel like I've got a candidate that's going to accept my client's job, that they're going to have more than one motivation or wound. And the more they have, the better. It makes it easier for us to convince them or to talk to them about why they should accept this opportunity. If they're on contract, right? Is your contract being extended? If it's being extended, why would you be looking at something else? Or they say, I don't know if my contract's extended. If it was extended, have you asked them? Have you talked to your current recruiter about that? And like really delving deep into to those factors. Other things that we're really looking at is, again, those character traits are super important. So again, as I mentioned earlier, that sometimes hiring managers, they hire based on their gut feel that they like the person, which is important, but they need to have the skills and the capabilities and the right motivation. It's not just purely based on the character traits. That's part of it. So character traits, what's the personality? How does the personality of the candidate fit the personality of the organization, the culture that the candidate thrives in versus the culture of the organization? And then just that overall fit. So does the overall fit, does the person, the candidate, fit the job? Does the client fit the candidate? And does the job fit the candidate? So there's a lot of various areas that things really do need to work. It's not rocket science, but there's an art form to all of it, to making sure that we're really bringing the right fit forward. So for example, if we're determining the fit, so the person organization and the person job, we might be thinking around, okay, well, what's the culture? What's the person organization fit? So when the values and the interests of a job candidate match the organizational culture, maybe it's they like that kind of Google culture. Maybe they like to have a dynamic team where they're working closely as in a teamwork kind of situation. Maybe they like the idea of that infamous Google culture. Maybe they don't like that idea. Maybe they prefer to be somebody who's working at home remotely and just head down and focused on their work. So how we gotta, really be making sure we're really asking those questions. As tempting as it is to squish a square peg into a round hole, that's only going to work in our against us in the long term. Interviewing. Obviously, this is going to be a critical part of our process. And it seems like for the majority of you do have that two-step process. So the screening to narrow down the pool of candidates, make sure you're spending the quality time with the right people right now. Doesn't mean that those people you've screened out may not be a fit at some point, but in the process. So as a third party, again, our ability to identify and screen candidates is a huge part of the service that the client is looking for. And however, from what I hear and from what I see, and we've certainly hired a lot of people in our company that have come from other agencies, that sometimes it's shocking for me to hear about how they just really don't interview their candidates, or that's just not part of the process. They do a quick 7-minute screen and then shoot the resume without a reference check or a profile or anything to the client. And while that might work for the short term, my fear is that it can come back to damage that company's reputation, our industry reputation, especially if they're just constantly getting high turnover and not happy with the candidates that they're getting. So we want to make sure that we are those ambassadors for the brand, ambassadors for our industry, and spend a little bit of extra time. The companies are paying us good dollars to bring them people and to deliver a service. So let's give them what they're paying for. There are different kinds of interview styles, and we all have our own style. My personal style is not to do an unstructured interview format. I'm more of a structured format. And then, maybe a little bit of tailoring depending on the role, but my key structure, my key questions are typically always the same for the candidate types. But there is the unstructured type, and some people that feels more natural. The reason why I've got this pinball machine here is that I feel sometimes whenever I've led an unstructured interview, and I certainly started my career that way, is I always felt like a pinball in a pinball machine, bouncing from all around. And there was no strategy, there was no rhyme or reason. Like, it was just boing, 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 back and forth, asking questions. And then I would take a look at my notes afterwards, and it was really hard to figure out who this person was that was sitting in front of me. So that's when I learned to really become much more structured. But there are some that just prefer that unstructured approach. However, they use without like a real format to have those predetermined questions. And typically what that might look like is more of a, I'm going to, take the resume, if it's an in-person interview or if it's a virtual interview, just really looking at the resume and then asking a bunch of questions based on the resume itself, but not asking a predetermined set of questions. And that in and of itself presents some challenges. Some key questions might be prepared in advance that might say, so tell me about yourself, but potentially not enough questions to make certain that if you're interviewing 5 candidates for one role, if it's unstructured, it's potentially going to run into the danger zone of asking each candidate something very different. And then it's really harder to kind of, if in your mind, or if you physically did that side-by-side comparison, to really have an accurate measure of which candidate truly is the best fit. If different questions are being asked. So different questions may be asked of different applicants because interviewers formulate questions based on the interviewee's responses. So that is part of it. But if that's the only way, it's going to really cause that reliability issue. And then that precision of a structured interview is going to give you that more reliability versus the unreliability of an unstructured interview. So my recommendation is, if you're somebody that some people say, well, structured feels too rigid, it doesn't feel authentic. And so if you're somebody that prefers that unstructured approach because you feel it's going to create more of a genuine connect and it feels less quote unquote interrogative, which I've heard some people say, I would recommend having that natural flow, but having key questions so that you're asking each candidate the same pertinent questions as it's relevant to a particular job if you're interviewing them for a job, so that each candidate can be measured equally and fairly against each other as you're determining which candidate gets in front of the clients. Again, my personal favorite, when I started to realize how unstructured my interviews were when I started out, is the structured approach. And really the primary purpose of the interview is to transfer information from the candidate to the recruiter, but then you can confidently transfer that information back to the client. And again, if you really want to bring a fair, equal approach to which candidates you're putting in front of them, one of the best ways of doing that is having that real structure that you can go back and take a look at and go, okay, well, this is why I'm presenting this candidate. And it will just help you if you profile candidates when you present them to the client as well, and crafting that profile quickly and not spending too much time there. So for me, again, this approach really does allow, and I still inject my personal character traits and make it genuine and authentic. But I just explained to the candidate that I've got a lot of questions that we need to get through. We have a very limited amount of time. I want to make sure that I'm asking you all the pertinent questions about you, what matters to you, what's important for you, but also making sure that we've got all the questions that we need to make certain that we're pairing you with the right opportunities. In chat, and again, there's no right or wrong, there's just personal preferences, but do you typically take a structured approach by using an actual form, or do you take an unstructured approach where it's just a little bit more free-flowing conversation? So is yours more structured or unstructured? And I'm just curious. Okay, so I see structured, more unstructured, both. Okay, structured. Okay. And if you don't have structured and you're more unstructured, but you would like to create more structure, then certainly I would really just recommend putting something together in a Word document. And it doesn't have to be a 10-page interview form. It could just be a couple of pages where you've got the key questions, and then you can create that flow, right? Structured with flavor added in. Beautiful. Okay, excellent. And when we're taking a look at the structured, all the candidates are asked the same predetermined questions, again, with some of your own flavor and mix into that and authenticity tied into that. And bias is reduced because candidates are evaluated on job-related questions if you're interviewing them for a specific job or a category of jobs, which are based on analysis of job duties, requirements, subjective and irrelevant questions are not necessarily asked. And so that when you're coming down to, you're like, okay, I got to decide, my client only wants 3 and I've interviewed 7 really great candidates, but which ones to get in front of the client? Number 1, which ones have the real wound or motivations? And then number 2, I'm going to reflect on the responses and make that decision. But even though we may be interviewing numerous candidates each week, it is still important to acknowledge the need for good interview structure and to follow it. Structure will, again, give us that greater opportunity for consistency and for accuracy. One of the downfalls of doing something frequently can also be complacency. So we can easily deviate from that. And especially some people who are veterans in the business who can pretty much do an interview in their sleep. It's so easy to become complacent. We're actually the ones that are the veterans that run the greater risk of veering off of a form, because we've been there, we've done that, we've seen it, we get it, we understand it, we make too many assumptions. Sometimes it's really about, let's just go back to the basics of when I started, right? I had a structure, I had a flow, and I hear that often, which is not uncommon. So let's take a look at some processes. If we're taking a look at what processes that we are looking at in that interview to make sure that we have a good structure. And again, some interviews might be 20 minutes, some might be 40 minutes, some might be 60 minutes. I know sometimes when we've done executive search roles, it could be 90 minutes. So every time it's going to be a little bit different, but really to create a good flow and a structure and to make sure we're not that pinball in a pinball machine where at the end of it, we may not really have the right information. Obviously the introduction, breaking the ice. I always recommend, I treat an interview the same way I would treat a client meeting. It's a meeting. So let's set the agenda so that the candidate knows that we have, time constraints. We have lots of questions to get through. We're always, start opening some questions with, tell me a little bit more about yourself, or again, let's reassess why you're looking. You're doing your skills assessment, your capability assessment. Maybe there's behavioral questions. What's their next ideal role? Maybe, compensation, of course. Maybe you're telling and selling them an opportunity. Maybe there's responding to their questions and then closing it off. So to me, that's just super straightforward, right? So what does that interview flow look like? And really setting that structure to make sure that we're getting the most out of the time. We work way too hard to find candidates, to figure out where we're going to source them, to actually get them on the phone, to actually get them to book a meeting with us. Use that time. You've got that golden opportunity. You've done it. You've done the hard part, which is finding the person. So now that you've got them, make it worth your while. Get as much information that you possibly can. Just some frequently used types of structured interviews could be things like the behavioral style interviews. And I do like to inject this in interviews. I'm not running a desk anymore, but I do some interviewing for our company for our own internal hiring. But I always train people, when you're interviewing with a candidate, ask your certain set of questions, but then also asking them some behavioral style interviews so that you know how they're going to respond to those types of questions. Why? Because nowadays, more and more companies, our clients, are asking behavioral and situational style interview questions. So we may as well start getting them used to that now. And then we know how to help them. We know how to coach them. We know what kind of information to share with them before they go to meet with our clients. So I'd like to know a little bit about how do they respond to these kind of questions. So there's the behavioral ones, which are questions that usually that are the ones that take place in the past. So, tell me about a time when you had a difficult client or a difficult colleague, or how you motivated others. Maybe you had to persuade leadership to make an unpopular decision. Tell me about a time when you had to go above and beyond. So those behavioral ones are sort of past behavior, which can often for the client and for us be an indicator of how they'll behave in the future. So the tell me about a time when behavioral is what have they done in the past, so that it indicates how they may behave in the future. And again, a lot of our clients are utilizing these behavioral style interviews. So I want to make sure that I'm injecting that in some of my interviewing with candidates so that I too will understand how do they fare in those. They're hard questions to respond to, much easier to go through the walk me through your resume kind of interviews, but those are only a small part of interviews these days. And so one of the things that I like to give some coaching on candidates for is the STAR method. Because again, that concept of behavioral and situational and those kind of questions are hard. It can throw a lot of people off. It's hard to even remember way back when certain situations happen. So if we're preparing them before they meet with our clients, then at least they can come best prepared as much as they possibly can. So I would always encourage having that conversation with candidates on, here are some of the most frequently used type of questions, behavioral style questions that you may see in an interview. And one of the most popular methods for that is the STAR method. And I would direct the candidates to go online. I would send them some stuff. I would send them a document or a link to a few things, so they can really start thinking about how can they get ready for those questions if they come up. Then the other part is the future type questions. And so these ones are more of the situational interview questions. Again, so the behavioral is what's happened in the past. And then situational is what would you do if? These ones are even more difficult for candidates to respond to because it's harder to prepare for that. It's somewhat easier to prepare for the behavioral if they start thinking about examples from the past. But typically speaking, situational interview style questions come up because maybe there's been a past challenge, and maybe through our communication with the clients, we know maybe there's been a challenge in their team. Maybe there's been team morale has been low. Maybe there's been problems. Maybe the previous person that this role is replacing was let go because of something they did. So they tend to ask more of these future style questions to see how they would fare in that particular role. And it's harder to predict what kind of questions those might be. Really are the trickiest. So these kind of questions might be, for example, what would you do if you made a mistake that no one else noticed? Meaning they're testing their integrity. What would you do if you were asked to perform a task that you've never done before and you really don't know how to do it, right? They're asking, finding out, are they going to be humble? Are they going to say, oh, I'll do it, and then try to wing it and not do a good job at it? What's their honesty like? What would you do if an angry, dissatisfied customer confronted you? How would you resolve their concern? So again, these are the kind of questions that are hard, but the more that we can inject these types of things into our own interview processes, again, we can start seeing how the candidates will do. We can coach them, we can help support them when the time comes to meet our clients. And I wanted to ask all of you other things that we want to be thinking about. Number one, can we ask these questions, and can our clients ask these sort of questions? So in chat, I'm going to open up the chat, and simply I want you to put a Y or an N. And I'm going to bring up a list of 20 kind of questions. And I really just love to get your thoughts on, do you feel that these are appropriate interview questions, either coming directly from you are coming directly from the client. So let's see what the first one is yes or no. How about this one? Are you a Canadian citizen? Yes or no? Can this be asked in an interview? Okay, let's see what everyone's thoughts are. Okay, no, it's correct. And a better way of asking that question is, are you authorized to work in Canada or do you require sponsorship? Number two, or actually go back. What languages do you read, speak, or write fluently? Yes or no? Okay, excellent. Yes. What days are you available to work or any restrictions working on certain days? Are you a member of a professional or trade group that is relevant to our industry? How old are you or when did you graduate from high school? Those came quickly. Correct. No. Another way that it might ask is if it's relevant, are you over the age of 18? If that's important. How much longer do you plan to work before you retire? Yes or no? Okay. The answer is no. Better to say, what are your long-term goals? I see you worked at ESSO. Do you know John Smith? Okay, interesting. So everyone said no. Normally I get yeses, so that's excellent. Oh, okay. I just got some yeses. Okay, so it's actually no. Better to say, are there any employees with ESSO that would provide you with a favorable reference? As much as we all love to name drop, it's just it could make it can make that person, not John Smith, it can make Jane Doe uncomfortable knowing that you may know John Smith, because maybe she doesn't like John Smith, maybe John Smith is her boss, maybe it's going to put her in an awkward position. Have you worked or earned a degree under another name? Yes or no? Okay, we have one no and one yes. The correct answer is, oh, we got two yeses. So the correct answer is yes. You can actually ask that. Do you plan to have children? Okay, I just laugh when they come through very quickly. Are you available to work overtime on occasion or can you travel when required? Would be a better question. Can you get a babysitter on short notice for overtime or travel? Okay, correct answer is no. You'll be required to travel or work overtime on short notice. Will this be a problem for you? Would be a better way that it can be asked. Who is your closest relative to notify in case of an emergency? Okay, right, not in the interview. So the answer is actually no. A better way of saying would be in case of an emergency, who should we notify? If that question was even coming up, because it says closest relative. Well, what if that person doesn't have a close relative? What if they don't want their relatives contacted? That would be a no. Number 12, what do your parents do for a living? Okay, so the answer is no. It might be more along the lines of, tell me about how you became interested in the accounting industry. Okay, are you vaccinated? Okay, some say no, some say yes, some say depends. Probably the easiest way of asking the question, again, if that still comes up, but some employers have a vaccine policy. Are you comfortable with that? And it depends if it's a bona fide occupational requirement. Okay. Last set here, if you get pregnant, will you continue to work and will you come back after maternity leave? That's a definite no. We've always had a man/woman do this job. How do you think you will stack up? That's a big no. Have you ever been disciplined for your behavior at work? So funny enough, intuitively, we would say no. But technically speaking, it's a question you can ask. I've never, I mean, for me, it's not something I would ever ask my candidates, but if your clients ever ask, technically, it's not considered illegal to ask that question. It just might come across as inappropriate. In different words, yeah, maybe asking it in different words. So have you ever been disciplined? Has there ever been a situation at work that you were not happy about? Or has there ever been a situation at work that put you in a it's a good question, Julianne. You're asking about in different words. I'd have to think about what a different word might be for that. Do you smoke or drink? Okay, it's a big no. You might say something, or they might say something. In the past, have you ever been disciplined for violating company policies forbidding the use of alcohol or tobacco products? Are you able to reach items on a shelf that's 5 feet tall? Yeah, actually, again, it's when that there's a lot of, usually I get like a mixed bag of responses, but you actually can ask that question. You're not asking them how tall are they, but you're asking, can you reach items? How much do you weigh? Okay, big all caps no. Okay, so you might say it, are you able to lift boxes weighing up to 50 pounds? How many sick days did you take last year? Yes or no? Okay, lots of no's. How many days of work did you miss last year? Is a better way of asking it. Are you able to perform the specific duties of this position, or do you have any restrictions allowing you to perform the duties of the specific role? Yes, you could ask that. Okay, just a few more. Are you able to perform the essential functions of this job with or without reasonable accommodations? Yep. Okay, excellent. Are you able to start work at 8 a.m.? Are you willing to relocate? Have you ever been convicted of X fraud, theft, and so on? Okay, so a question that could be asked is, have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense for when a pardon has not been granted? Okay, excellent. Fun stuff there. So we're going to look at some potential roadblocks. For every great candidate we find, there's always going to be some roadblocks that could prevent us from placing them into jobs. So again, this really goes back to that qualification process. So some examples could be, what are some of the roadblocks we're dealing with? Other jobs that they've applied for, other jobs they've yet to apply for. So even though they say, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to apply for another job, even though I've taken this job. Not always the case. Counter offers, contract extensions, contractual issues, notice periods, personal family considerations, visa requirements, the commute, the geography, the culture, the environment, not liking who they meet, bonuses are due, pension, skeletons in the closet. So per references. So again, the better we get at, first of all, sourcing the right people, interviewing the right people, asking the right questions, spending the time, digging deep, getting more and more towards a more structured approach so we are consistently asking these questions and we don't forget. the less of a chance that we'll have surprises that come back to bite us. Now, again, doesn't mean we won't have surprises, but it definitely decreases that chance of surprises coming back to bite us, recognizing there's so many things that can go wrong in the process. One of the things that we really want to be thinking about is, how do we test them and how do we check them and how do we do those references so that we make sure that we don't have those skeletons in the closet or really poor references as well. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the different types of testing. This is just very high level that we're going to go through this because every company will have different policies. I know some companies, it's contractually written in your contracts that you're contractually obligated to do reference checking. I highly recommend it either way, but there's just certain things that may not be as relevant for everyone. So we'll just go through this pretty quick for the last 15 minutes. But basically really taking a look at background and reference checks. So maybe we're looking at former employers, current supervisors. Some companies will do the credit background checks. Maybe they do driver's abstract or criminal checks based on, need for that. Some look at social networking sites, not so much creeping them on social sites, but there are, if some of you don't use them, there are a lot of background checks that actually go through social networking sites for various things. And it's such an important part of the selection process, really is that reference checking. And I know our company, we're contractually obligated, so we just cannot and will not submit a candidate without going through a thorough reference checking process. And you're only doing yourself and your client a great disservice if you are, glossing over that step of the process or not doing them at all. If you haven't taken the business ethics course yet for the CPC, or if you have, you may recall, and I believe that the example would have come up of the company where they hired somebody, the recruiters, I think it was Drake International, found a candidate, placed them, and if they didn't even bother doing the background checks or the reference checking, and then that candidate defrauded that company of, I don't know, something like $200,000, and had the reference checks been done and the background checks been done, then they would have uncovered that she had done that in her previous positions as well. So there was a huge gap of what happened there. So reference checking and background checking saves you, again, you're liable as the minute you become part of the recruiting process, you're an extension of that process for your clients, and there is that liability. So reference checking, I can't go without saying, it just needs to be done. And it really, again, it speaks to our industry. It speaks to us being ambassadors for our brand and for the industry by doing that and doing the checking. Doesn't mean that we're always going to get the best reference checks. Doesn't mean that we can control if our candidates only give us people that are going to give us the best references, but all we can do is do our best and try to get to the truth of the matter. So references are done for so many reasons. Again, gain assurance that the individual has been successful in their jobs, validate, dispel any concerns that you may have, get a better understanding of the type of supervision, who that candidate is, what works, what doesn't work. But really what we're really wanting to really try to do is really get those candid references as much as we can. And those can be hard to obtain, as many people obviously are nervous or they're hesitant to disclose anything negative about a past employee or a peer. So I really do have, when I did thorough reference checking, it would sometimes be a 15-20 minute conversation where I'm really trying to build that relationship and make them feel comfortable that it's really important. Still doesn't always mean you're going to get the truth of the matter, and you can only do your best by really trying to dig as much as you possibly can. And I also feel that doing reference checking is important to make that part of your daily routine. And the reason for that is it kind of helps flex those reference check muscles on digging and asking the questions and trying to get as much information as you can. But as a recruiter, one of my success factors was flipping that reference check into a headhunt, asking them if they themselves are interested in change. And depending on the title, if they were a director or a manager at somebody in a hiring manager capacity, I would ask them, what about you? What about your team? What about your organization? Do you use recruiters? Do you see a need for adding to your team? How might we be able to partner with you? So I've always looked at reference checking as a really easy way to headhunt and as a really easy way to do business development while also getting information about the candidates. So I see no downside to the idea of doing reference checking as often as you possibly can. Some of the things that we want to be thinking about is how do we get the right people on the phone. And someone once said to me that one of the ways that they are trying to make sure that they're getting actual references on the phone, not fake references. So just like we have fake resumes, typically those candidates who are providing fake resumes often are also providing fake references and other candidates, their buddy. They can fake that. Now, you would like to give most people the benefit of the doubt that they're not doing that on a frequent basis, but it does happen. So I remember someone once saying that the only way that they really get a hold of a candidate or of a reference is by calling them directly at their place of employment, if they can. So when the candidate gives them the phone number, I want their cell number in case I can't reach them, but I also want the phone number of where they're working because I want to get dispatched through the main line in order to be able to ask for the right person and make sure I'm actually speaking to somebody live at that company. Thought it was an interesting point, so just wanted to share that as food for thought. Employment testing, again, really the process for that and the purpose of that is just really to gather some objective data about candidates who might be right for the job. Maybe it can help people inform decision-making, whether a candidate is successful in a role or not successful based on what some of those tests might be. I know that we do those internally here. With our company for anyone that we might be hiring, and certainly do that for our clients as well. And because hiring is time consuming, it is costly, it is stressful. Candidates can have impressive resumes, they can still have good references, but they may not do really well on some of the employment testing, which we might want to look at that to help mitigate the risk of making hiring mistakes. So hopefully our clients aren't using only this to be their deciding factor, because that's also frustrating when you do have great candidates, you do have great references. So these are often used, in some cases, some clients will use them as a yes or no for hiring. But really one of the things that I really want to stress with clients is to utilize this as one part of the big picture, not the only picture, but one part of the big picture. And really thinking around how can it help them make informed decisions without it being the only decision. So we might have things like an aptitude test or a knowledge test to really maybe understand a candidate's knowledge about concepts or practices relevant to that successful job performance. There could be those personality or psychological assessments that can assess feelings or traits or behaviors that are relevant to the job. Skills testing, that could really be to assess their ability to do certain things on the job. It could be, I know, some skills testing that gets done, for example, in for our office personnel side of our business. Lots of different skills tests that happen in there, typing speed, typing accuracy, Excel, things like that. There could be physical ability tests, which could be important for, let's say, a firefighter or police officer, which again, those really have to be done with a bona fide occupational requirement. Other things around that could be, drug testing or psychological assessments to test candidates' health conditions. So those things really, really have to be done with a bona fide occupational requirement. I know I had a client that was doing that drug tests, and our candidates backed out, not because they were worried, but because they weren't supposed to do that. And it was a whole issue, and we stopped working with that company. And that was many years back. So really thinking about what's the relevancy of it and is it important? And then a work sample test. So testing candidates' likely future job behaviors, maybe under controlled and simulated conditions. So that could be like a pilot. And, being in that kind of simulated environment as an example. Other things, as I mentioned, that for those medical and ability tests, I've already put the emphasis on it, but really want to stress that point. And again, you would learn more about this in some of your other CPC modules, but that bona fide occupational requirement is so critical. And according to the Human Rights Code, to conduct a test of this nature, it really must have that bona fide occupational requirement. I can't stress that enough. If your client is recommending doing any of those types of testing and it really isn't bona fide reasons, then for sure some coaching or consulting or a conversation, or it really just needs to be addressed. And so when we're looking at the idea of a BFOR, it is that procedure. It's used to defend a discriminatory employment practice or policy on the grounds of that policy or practice was adopted in an honest and good faith belief that it was reasonably necessary to assure the efficient and economical performance of the job without endangering employees or the general public. So again, just wanted to make a very special note for that one. And FYI, from what I've learned, unless it's changed and I haven't been informed, but drug testing is illegal in Canada and it can only be done after an incident or an accident. Other things to be thinking around, other things that pre-employment assessment benefits can have for an organization. So again, it could help them to determine and make the right decisions, but it can really help in, of course, getting to know the candidate. It can screen them faster. It can increase objectivity. It can recognize potential of others. It can raise red flags as well that we want to address. It can help reduce ultimate turnover and then help the clients avoid costly mistakes. So whether your clients are doing it internally and they have their own processes for that, or whether you offer some of these tools for them, lots of good reasons on why it really helps in that overall process. And then it's not always a guarantee of fit. At the end of the day, as I've mentioned, it should be considered one part of the picture, but not the entire picture. And I've really had to talk to clients about that. Again, sometimes I talk to them until I'm blue in the face and they still don't pay attention to that. They go 100% based on the results of these tests. And that's their prerogative. But I really try to encourage that it's part of the picture to look at, not the entire picture. And so just a summary of everything that we have covered today. We've spoke a little bit about resumes, what to look for in resumes, how to quickly screen the resumes, what we're looking for, a little bit about phone screening before we invite them for a full interview, maybe a little bit about, applications and do they fill out forms or not fill out forms? Do we create a form so that we can measure candidates and evaluate candidates fairly against each other, similar to what our clients might do with a matrix or a rubric. We looked a little bit around tests and assessments, the interview process, the depth of the process. We spoke about the value of structured versus unstructured, using interview forms versus no interview forms. We've talked a little bit about the idea of adding in some more behavioral and situational style questions. We didn't really talk about profiling candidates, but we spoke about the fact that the more we know the candidates, the more we understand who they are, the success factors, their capabilities. It can help you present them to a client. The value of important reference checks, background checks, work samples, other things, do they have LinkedIn recommendations and sources that could also help us determine the right fit is any kind of past placements, but that we've already done with that client. And that's it. So I would like to thank you for your time and your attention. One last request. I would love for you to go back into the chat and just let me know on what some of your takeaways were from today's session or any questions. If you have questions, feel free to pop in, come off mute. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, or I'd like to know what your biggest takeaway might be from today's session. Again, for a lot, it might just be refresher and reminder. Some of it may be new. So I'm hoping to hear.
Jill, I have a question.
Yeah.
You just said that, and sorry if I missed part of this, but you said drug testing is illegal in Canada and can only be done after an incident.
That is what my knowledge has been. And so if I'm incorrect, I'd love for someone to let me know that.
I don't know that you are. I just didn't know that. So
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking. I have
Yeah.
that mandate that before they'll hire someone, right? So
Yeah.
There are some exceptions for safety sensitive positions and certain provincial legislation.
Okay.
Thank you. And from my understanding too, is that it's usually after post offer with that or post acceptance of an offer. Is that correct?
Sounds right. Yeah. Yeah. If it is something they need to have, it would be after the offer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some good refreshers, but also we'll definitely work to take a more structured approach to my interviews to see how that may benefit me. Okay. Excellent. Any other takeaways from today? Or any other questions? refresher for me. Okay, perfect. All right, if we don't have any others, really informative and refreshing, a little out of the recruiting end recently, so took some good ideas. Thank you. My pleasure. All right, so I do want to again thank everybody. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to make new connects with individuals and to answer any questions that you may have. I certainly wish you all the very best when you write your exam. And I don't know if any of you are going to be at the ACSESS conference in May. I certainly hope that some of you will be there. I'll be there, and other members of my Applin team. Actually, our CEO is also going to be speaking at that, as in addition to myself. So Tara, will be happy to meet you there. Tara, I guess you're coming with Angela, which is exciting. And I will look forward to making sure that you all come up and say hello to me when you're there. So congratulations, everyone, in advance of your exams, and I will wish you a rest of a good day.
Thank you.